Might be fooled into thinking that this Kennedy the name you can trust guy is the one to vote for instead. Yeah, that robocall that you just heard, that in politics is called a dirty trick. These sorts of things are generally designed to prey on older voters, I'm sad to say. The website balloonjuice.com also reported today another polling call, which purported to be on behalf of Democrat Martha Coakley, but really probably wasn't. According to the person who received the call, here's what was asked. Pay attention closely. You'll have to in order to understand what they were on about. Quote, in World War II, 6 million Jews were killed by the Nazis. Now, 6 million Israelis live under constant threat of attack from Islamic extremists. Meanwhile, 1 million women and children in sub-Saharan Africa die each year from malaria. The United Nations could use its billions of dollars to protect the people of Israel or to prevent the spread of malaria. In your opinion, is the threat to security in Israel a more pressing concern that should immediately be addressed by the United Nations than the epidemic of malaria in Africa? And by the way, who do you like for Senate? Yeah, no idea what's going on there. That call was identified as a polling call for this election. It originated from a Washington, D.C. area code. We repeatedly tried calling the phone number today that was identified as the source of that bamboozling call. We never reached a live person on the other end. In addition to bamboozlements like that and dirty trick robocalls, there have been sporadic reports of ballot irregularities today. A handful of voters report being given ballots already filled in for Republican Scott Brown. Martha Coakley's campaign says they were made aware of at least 6 such incidents. Secretary of State is downplaying this. Yes, it has been a weird day here in Massachusetts, and honestly a weird culmination to a really important Senate race. As is usually the case in special elections, voter turnout is the key tonight. The rule of thumb going into this election was that high voter turnout, especially in urban areas, would benefit Democrat Martha Coakley. The turnout in Boston appeared to be high earlier in the day. Tonight, then, a Democratic operative told the Washington Post's Chris Cillizza, quote, Boston turnout numbers not good for Coakley. But as much of these things often are, before we get the hard numbers, there was conflicting information. The Secretary of State's office this afternoon released hard data, saying that the actual turnout numbers in Boston as of 3 p.m. were roughly on par with turnout for the 2006 election. That's a big deal because in 2006, that was a real election. Not that this one isn't real, but this one is a special election. There's only one line on the ballot. In 2006, that was a traditional midterm election, and if turnout in Boston was on par with what it had been for a real election in 2006, that would have been seen as good news for Martha Coakley today. Other silver Coakley linings, a Rasmussen Election Day poll found that people who decided in the last few days broke 47-41 for Coakley. Pollster John Zogby predicting tonight that Coakley will win. But again, I can tell you at this hour, with 57% of precincts reporting, Republican Scott Brown leads Democrat Martha Coakley 53-46. Let's go out to the campaigns right now. Joining us now from Republican State Senator Scott Brown's headquarters in downtown Boston is MSNBC's chief Washington correspondent, Norah O'Donnell. Norah, thanks very much for joining us. What's the latest from there?
Rachel, it is a packed crowd here and very, very noisy here. This is where all of Scott Brown's supporters have gathered. I have to tell you, it's a very different scene from Martha Coakley's headquarters, where I was just about an hour ago, where the ballroom was almost totally empty, only a bunch of reporters in there. So there's clearly a great deal of excitement here. I just spoke with a senior GOP official, though, who noted that Scott Brown, according to the current results, is ahead just 5 points, and that Republican official did express some concern and said to me, quote, this is not going to be a blowout. This may not be a double-digit win. Stressing, of course, that we do not have all the results in now, but they do feel confident of a victory here, according to Brown supporters. The other thing I want to touch on, too, is that I've spoken with a number of people in both campaigns, both parties, and I'm stunned, quite frankly, by the information that I received from a Democratic Party official already blaming Martha Coakley, the candidate, even before the polls closed. This official telling me that in between that key period of December 19th, when Coakley had a 20-point lead, and then January 5th, where her lead was cut in half, that Coakley was, quote unquote, literally on vacation. This is a Democratic Party official blaming her, saying that she went to the Caribbean while Scott Brown was able to define this campaign. I I don't recall a time, Rachel, when I've covered House and Senate races and even presidential campaigns when one party official has been already dissing the candidate even before the polls closed. Rachel?
MSNBC Chief Washington Correspondent Norah O'Donnell. Norah, thank you very much. Norah reporting tonight from Scott Brown headquarters. Thank you very much. Standing by for us at Democratic candidate Martha Coakley's headquarters is NBC Congressional Correspondent Kelly O'Donnell. We've got all O'Donnells on alert tonight. Kelly, what is the mood at Coakley headquarters where you are?
Well, good evening, Rachel. I hope you'll understand we're in that magical election night place where we can't hear anything but the House band. So let me just run with it for a moment, and I'll tell you what the Martha Coakley team is thinking tonight. All day they have been trying to remind us that there is a difference between buzz and energy on the street and the capabilities of a Democratic get-out-the-vote machine. So they remain confident that they have been able to reach their voters, get them to the polls. For example, at one point today, an operative told me they had 1,500 requests for rides to a polling place. So they send out volunteers, put a voter in the car, and get them to the place to vote. Now, Martha Coakley had also been criticized in this race for not working hard enough, not shaking enough hands, not doing enough of the shoe leather side of politics that can be so important here. So part of her day was spent trying to catch up on some of that, being at polling places, meeting with voters, saying hello, trying to close the deal if she could at all on this day. And so they want to remind people that there is also, in their view, a connection that she could make with women independents in Massachusetts. Remember, she has won statewide office in Massachusetts before. Scott Brown has won his state Senate seat, a difference they point out. So they remain encouraged. They believe that she has been kind of a victim of the times, and they've learned some things through this race. Democrats will acknowledge that there have been some missteps, but they also believe that the attention brought on this race has then kicked into overdrive some of the Democratic machine, that even if some had some lukewarm feelings about this particular candidate, they were wanting to get out the vote tonight. Rachel?
Kelly O'Donnell, NBC News Congressional Correspondent, thank you very much for that report, and protect your hearing while you're there. Appreciate it. Kelly, thank you very much. We turn now to the former chairman of the Democratic Party, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. Governor Dean, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on, Rachel.
Obviously, the final results are not in yet tonight. Anything could happen. But to what do you attribute the tightening of this race down the stretch? Why is Scott Brown doing so well vis-a-vis Martha Coakley?
Well, first of all, he ran a terrific campaign. It was very much grassroots. He was everywhere. That helps. Second of all, it's pretty clear that people are upset by what's going on in Washington. They don't like the partisanship. They don't like the bickering. And they don't, I think, really see the kind of change they were hoping to get. I had a number of people, Republicans, who had voted for the president the last time around, and they're really looking for some real change. I think the American people want real change, and they haven't seen that yet. And so we're going to wade through all this, and it's going to be tough. If Boston's not in, we're in good shape. If Boston's in with this 63%, we're in deep trouble. And there's no way of knowing from Burlington, Vermont, who's in and who's not. But I'd love to know which precincts are in and which aren't.
Governor Dean, you are credited and remembered as DNC chairman for your famous 50-state strategy, and that was all about trying to have Democrats contest races that in previous Democratic parties they might have written off. This may be the evidence of a 50-state strategy by the Republican Party. It also may be evidence that the Democrats have been taking the Northeast for granted. Do you see there is a possibility of further Republican inroads in the Northeast?
Well, no, I think this is an exception. The Northeast is not a conservative place, and I think I still believe that Martha can pull this out. But if she doesn't, I think the voters of Massachusetts are going to find out that Scott Brown doesn't vote anything like the average voter of Massachusetts. So I don't really think it's that. I really think that you got to stand up and be strong. And people really were hoping there was going to be a real push for some differences. And a lot of this is not anybody's fault. Well, maybe George Bush's fault. I mean, we have over 10% unemployed. That always is a drag on the election. But I think people really wanted to see more change. They voted for real change, and a lot of Republicans voted for real change, too. We haven't delivered it. The health care bill. You know, a lot of people sitting around with special interests making deals. The Senate bill is essentially written by the insurance companies. This is a problem for us, and this is the way. This is like Washington was when I got there 5 years ago. You know, the Democrats weren't sure that they were really Democrats, and if you want to win, you actually can't sort of move to the middle and become a Republican. You've got to stand up and stand for the things that you got elected on and the Democratic Party believes in. And you haven't seen that in the health care bill, and I think that's part of the problem. I do not think, however, that this is a referendum on health care, and I certainly don't think it's a referendum on President Obama. I think it's a very smart, tough Republican campaigner. People are upset because of unemployment, and they don't think the climate in Washington, that people are listening to them in Washington. They think they're more interested in making deals with special interests than they are in dealing with the Wall Street bankers who've ripped them off.
To hear you say, though, that this isn't any one person's fault, this isn't anybody specifically's fault, except maybe George Bush. You're the only Democrat in politics right now who's saying anything like that. Democrats formed a circular firing squad over this election, even, I mean, hours before the polls closed. Certainly people blame each other when things go wrong, but today it was overt, it was loud, it was from all quarters, and potential Democratic voters hadn't even stopped voting yet in Massachusetts by the time it broke out. That seems to me like an incredible breakdown in party discipline, just in terms of elections 101. What do you think?
I think that's right. I think I would say to my fellow Democrats, this is not the time for pointing the blame. We can figure out there's plenty of things that went wrong, plenty of blame to be spread around. People who blame others are losers. If you want to win elections, you stop blaming and you get to work. And that's what's going to have to be done after this election. Whether we win or lose, I think the message has been sent that if we plan to do better than this in 2010, we better do better for the American people between now and next November.
Governor Dean, former Democratic Party chairman, as tonight's results become known and we start to think about what it's going to mean for the health care fight, we look forward to having you back and interpreting what these results mean for the prospects for health reform in the country. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so what if you ran a political campaign and you pretended like there were no politicians in it? That's kind of what Republican Scott Brown did here in Massachusetts. The Boston Globe's Peter Canellos joins us next. We're coming to you live from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. If you couldn't tell, stay with us. We'll be right back. Good evening. We are live at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts. We are covering, of course, the Massachusetts Senate race, the race to replace the late Senator Ted Kennedy. Right now, we're looking at 66% of precincts reporting here in Massachusetts. State Senator Scott Brown, the Republican, with 52.6% of the vote, and Attorney General Martha Coakley, the Democrat in the race, with 46.4%. And 66%, about two-thirds of precincts reporting. Stay with us for all the latest results. We're live here in Massachusetts. We'll be right back.
I drive a truck and I'm asking for your vote.
I have a truck too, but I don't necessarily think that means you should vote for me. Scott Brown, Massachusetts State Senator, the Republican candidate in today's special election to fill Ted Kennedy's U.S. Senate seat. He has built a campaign largely around the persona of man in truck without discernible political record. He does have a record, though, which includes a strange conspiracy theory that the president's mother was secretly not married when she gave birth to the president. That's not true, but apparently in 2008, Mr. Brown thought it nevertheless was of some political relevance.
Barack's mom had him when she was 18 years old.
And married.
Well, I don't know about that.
Scott Brown, the Obama's mother's secretly not married candidate in today's Senate race. Mr. Brown is also running as the potential 41st vote in the United States Senate against health reform, which has caused a lot of political hyperventilation on both sides of the aisle. In addition to having a really nice green GMC truck and pledging to kill health reform, Mr. Brown has also campaigned as a family values candidate. His wife is a local reporter here in Massachusetts. One of his two daughters is a former American Idol semifinalist. I only mention that. It's only relevant because Mr. Brown's daughter has played a political role in this election. His campaign dispatched her when they needed a hard-to-punch-back-at attack on the Democratic candidate, Martha Coakley, particularly if they wanted to invoke gender. The attacks like this one quote, Martha Coakley's new negative ad represents everything that discourages young women from getting involved in politics. And as a young woman, I'm completely offended by that. She even spelled Massachusetts wrong in her original ad, which is very embarrassing, I must say, as a young woman. Smart move, right? Politically speaking, to sling that kind of attack through your 21-year-old daughter? I mean, there's really no way to return fire against an opponent's child. It's like using your kid as a human shield. Awkward also for the family values mantle is that Mr. Brown, before running for this U.S. Senate seat, was probably best known as the conservative Massachusetts politician who had posed nude in Cosmo in 1982 as winner of that year's Sexiest Man contest. And now for the awkward segue to Mr. Brown's support from the teabag the liberal Dems before they teabag you folks. Mr. Brown's campaign has received at least $348,000 in just the past couple of weeks from the Our Country Deserves Better PAC. They're the folks behind the Tea Party Express bus tour. We're now hearing, in terms of the United States Senate race here in Massachusetts, that the AP is now projecting that Scott Brown is the winner of the Massachusetts United States Senate race. Again, this is an AP projection. Associated Press now projecting that Scott Brown is the winner of the Massachusetts Senate race to replace the late Ted Kennedy. Again, this is an AP projection. Nora O'Donnell has confirmed that Martha Coakley has called Scott Brown to concede the race. We're here in Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain in Massachusetts, here in Boston, and the results here are not coming as a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention at all during the day. As America tries to absorb the news that Democrats have lost Ted Kennedy's Senate seat to the Republican Party, the next thing people are going to be doing is try to learn who this Republican is who has taken this seat from a Democratic Party that appeared remarkably complacent in terms of its ability to hold on to this seat. Joining us now is Peter Canellos. He's editorial page editor of the Boston Globe. Mr. Canellos, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Let me ask you first, just for your reaction to the big headline. The Associated Press has now just projected Scott Brown as the winner. What does this mean for Massachusetts, and what does it say about the state of the two parties here?
Well, it says that we're not a one-party system anymore. I mean, it says that Democrats can't take these kinds of races for granted. And I think that what you were saying before about complacency certainly rings true. The Democrats did not see this coming and didn't really have a message that could answer voters' concerns, voters' dissatisfaction with the economy. So, the last few days we've sort of seen this coming. So it's not a complete surprise, but I think a lot of Democrats were caught flat-footed here.
Peter, in terms of looking at Massachusetts voting patterns, obviously 4 of the last 5 governors elected in this state were Republican governors. It's thought of as a very blue state, largely on the strength of its own state legislature and the congressional delegation from this state. Do you see a different message here in the vote for Brown than, say, the vote for Mitt Romney or Paul Cellucci or Bill Weld?
Well, slightly different because the health care issue was somewhat prominent. But what people have to keep in mind is the Republicans have succeeded at the gubernatorial level as a check on the one-party control of the Massachusetts legislature. There's a lot of anger at the Massachusetts legislature right now. They've raised taxes. They have to balance a very difficult budget. And I think that some of that anger has crept into the Senate race. So it's not all about President Obama or about health care. It's about one-party control in Massachusetts at a time when people have a lot of complaints about the state government.
In terms of Massachusetts' reflection on the nation more broadly, the Republican Party structure in Massachusetts has long been thought of as weak. We did see a lot of conservative activists and Republicans from outside the state coming in, especially late in the day, into this race to try to bolster Scott Brown's chances. Do you think that redounds in the long run to a stronger state party structure here, or do you think this was a one-off special election kind of infusion of energy?
I I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, the state has been trending independent in recent years, and obviously Brown was able to really tap into that in a big way. Without a big infrastructure, they're not going to take over the Massachusetts legislature anytime soon. They may not even break the veto-proof majority that the Democrats have. They're not going to win a lot of congressional races, but, you know, there may be a few congressmen who are looking over their shoulders right now, and, you know, Brown has provided a template for some Republicans to win in Massachusetts.
Peter Canellis from the Boston Globe, editorial page editor. Appreciate your time tonight. I know you're going to have a very, very busy evening writing this up. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Joining us here live at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain is my friend and colleague Chris Matthews. What's your reaction to the big headline?
Well, I'm not stunned tonight, but I would have been stunned if somebody told me this 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago. This is Massachusetts. This is the state where to deviate off to the right would be to vote for Paul Tsongas. You know what I mean? That would be getting out of the 40-yard line. I think it's a stunning victory for a candidate who's new, basically, at this level, who's run a perfect campaign. He campaigned with identifying himself with John Kennedy on smart government, smart fiscal policy, not necessarily right-wing policy. John Kennedy believed that taxes can be used to stimulate growth at the right time, at the right part of the period in the business cycle. It can be a useful tool. Certainly not a right-wing view. He basically said this health care bill is too big, it's too much government. We don't know what's in there, and by the way, it's being sold to the people state by state in a corrupt fashion. He had an argument. I came up with something. I think you will like this.
Okay. Maybe
it's salve for people in the part of the country that don't feel too happy about this result, but I think it's very American. One of my heroes over the years was William Allen White, the great Midwestern newspaper editor. And he said this, and I think this is true about America. The most precious gift God has given to this land is not its riches of soil and forest and land, but the divine dissatisfaction planted deeply in the hearts of the American people. We are a dissatisfied people. We are easily drawn to a candidate who promises deliverance. 2 years ago, we voted for deliverance with Barack Obama. We will vote for deliverance again in 2 years if we're not happy. The country wants something better than what it has. We will argue because we know it's true. The country's not satisfied with a health care system that leaves millions of people in the emergency room waiting 4 and 5 hours just to get basic care. That's not a good system. But that dissatisfaction has been overwhelmed by bad politics and smart politics on the right by a complaint about fiscal overkill. And that is the problem the Democrats face right now. A sense not that their values are wrong, not that people don't want to help, but there's a sense of fiscal overreach. The debt is too big. The government's taking on too many responsibilities. I think that's what's driving.
That's a messaging argument. It's not a policy argument, though.
Well, I think it's the fiscal challenge is not a joke.
Yeah, but if you were really upset about fiscal challenges, to look at the guy who turned surpluses into deficits, they would have been up in arms then. And there was no Tea Party movement against George Bush. You know, I mean, they now, in retrospect, say, oh, yeah, we hated it when we did it. We just never said anything about it.
The numbers are larger now.
The numbers are larger now because we're digging out of a hole. It's absolutely, I mean, nobody's going to argue that we're not spending a ton right now. It should, I think
it needs to be asked. Conservatives are hypocrites. I mean, that's not a big point, though. I mean, come on, you're better than that. They're hypocrites. They didn't admit their own fiscal imbalance.
It just means that, and therefore, I don't think you can say that the policy is at the root of this dissatisfaction. When you look at the voter identification numbers in Massachusetts right now, everybody thinks in Massachusetts it's so blue. The same proportion of voters in Massachusetts identify as Democrats as do in the country as a whole. It's like a third, 33, 35%. There aren't any more Democrats here by identification. What there are is a ton more independents. Right. And Americans have this desire to correct for majorities. And when majorities get big, we like to dial them back. And the question is not whether or not Republicans are going to figure out a way to ride that. It's whether Democrats are going to figure out a way to stop it.
Well, I don't think my daughter's very concerned about debt. She's in a group called Concerned Youth of America. They're very bipartisan, very concerned about debt. Larry Summers, if you talk to him, is very concerned about this debt. That's why we're having a hard time in Washington coming up with tax relief as a way of helping the economy move forward, because there's a danger of adding to the debt. I think that's a real problem. I think when this candidate came along and talked about taxes, he was really talking about other things. He was talking about worries about overkill in terms of government spending. And I think they're worried about it. The people are worried. We'll see as we analyze this in the days ahead. I don't think it's irrational. I think it's an argument. I think you have to...
I think it's a great message, but I do think that it is irrational because I think that it redounds to conservatives in terms of the political benefit, which makes no sense when you look at the relationship of conservative policies in government and what they've done to the fiscal situation. Might be unfair. It just means that it's not policy, it's politics. And it means that maybe Democrats need to get better about talking about their own fiscal responsibility.
I think I look at the numbers and I am worried. I'm worried about this government committing itself to so many entitlement programs and committing itself to such a level of taxation to support those entitlement programs.
Has Barack Obama raised taxes or cut taxes?
People are seeing it coming.
Yeah. You can't say theoretically he might someday raise taxes and I'm going to vote against
what is
people
very impressive is what we saw in the last couple of weeks. A candidate came out of nowhere, a state senator. He's attractive physically. I guess that always counts in politics. He has some charisma, some charm. But his big message was, Jack Kennedy cut taxes. We got to be worried and cut taxes. We got to do something on the tax front. And then he came out against the health care bill and said, one thing I'll do if I get elected, I'll vote no. I sign my name now, Scott Brown, 41. I will vote against the tax bill. So voters know two things about this guy. He's going to vote against the health care bill, and he's going to cut taxes. They love it.
But here's the thing, though. It's the total divorce from reality. To say I'm the fiscally conservative guy, I'm going to vote against health reform. What does health reform do to the budget, to the deficit, according to the CBO? It reduces the deficit.
The CBO, and you believe, and you think the people of Massachusetts
I believe the CBO more than I believe a guy running for Senate,
They're just going through a health care fight up here. They got a health care plan. They know these cost figures are never reliable. There's always an overrun. They know the government always underestimates the cost of programs. They know that.
On policy, though, to say it's fiscally responsible to not reform health care
I'm for you. Look, I'm for health care reform. I'm talking about the voters of Massachusetts and what they did today. I think they voted their concern, which I think is legitimate, about debt.
I think they voted with the message, and I think it's a message that is coherent and totally divorced from reality.
They made a mistake.
Well, I believe
they made a mistake.
I believe that Scott Brown's policy-based campaigning was dishonest. That's what I believe. And Howard Dean is going to join us now to talk on the healthcare side.
Fair enough.
Let's bring Howard Dean back into the conversation. Go on, last word. Go say it.
Well, I just think that this dissatisfaction the American people feel right now is against incumbents. It was 2 years ago. That doesn't change. Who are you going to blame? You're going to blame the political establishment that's been in power a long time up here. Fairly or not, Martha Coakley comes out of that political establishment. She's not a heavyweight. She's not a big shot. She hasn't been in power a long time. She's done a good job as AG. But she's seen as part of the team. You know, in college, where the same people run every year for student council president, and finally around junior year, some nerd comes along and beats them because we're just tired of voting for the same people, right? That's what happened.
I think I was that nerd.
Well, maybe you were. By the way, Bill Clinton was the establishment guy that lost in his third year.
All right, joining us now, bringing into the conversation, is the former chairman of the Democratic Party, former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. I said we'd talk to you once the results were clear. I didn't think it would be so quickly, but let me get your initial reaction to the results tonight that Scott Brown has beaten Martha Coakley in Massachusetts for the United States Senate.
Well, first I should congratulate Scott Brown, Senator Brown. You know, he may make the process better. I think we would have been better off if we'd only had 59 senators to start with, and that's what we've got now. You know, Martha is a great public servant. I think it's too bad that she didn't get this seat. She's a serious candidate, a serious person. I assume she gets to go on and continue to be Attorney General for a while longer. Let me just say, you know, there are going to be a million theories about where this happened, and as they say in Washington, those who say don't know, and those who know don't say. I don't think anybody knows right now. I do know that I agree with Chris that people are trying to send a message. I think the message has more to do with wanting real change, wanting real reform. I also think that we're going to have to not have a circular firing squad. The message that I think, or the antidote that I'd give, is we got to be tougher. I've said that Democrats haven't been tough enough. George Bush would have had the health care bill done a long time ago, and it would have gone through reconciliation, would have been what we wanted. And I don't want to harp on the health care bill all night. The fact of the matter is, though, most people in Massachusetts like their health care system. It's expensive, but it covers 97% of the people. We know that from polling information. So I don't think this was a backlash against the fact that we needed health care reform. I think it was a backlash against Washington, and I think the Democrats happen to be in the way. The Republicans are always much better at messaging in opposition than we are. The problem is they can't govern when they win. And so the Democrats, if we want to govern right, we're going to have a message. We're going to have to show decisiveness. We're going to have to show boldness. We're going to have to show toughness, and we're going to have to show leadership. And leadership is not trying to be a centrist and get everybody to work together, because it's not going to happen. The Republicans wanted to kill this bill from the beginning, the health care bill, simply to embarrass the president. The president was elected to lead, and the way we're going to get through this is he's going to lead. We're not going to deal with the special interests or the Republicans anymore. It will become their own special interest. We're going to get this stuff done. And when you get it done right, which means not letting it hang out over 2 more election cycles, 2010 and 2012, but getting some people insured within a few months of the president's signing of that bill, well, then we're going to have something to show for it, and we're going to recover in 2010. But this is an example of what can happen if you aren't real clear about your message. Scott Brown was real clear about his message tonight.
Governor Dean, in terms of the Democrats' opportunity to do the kind of thing you are describing, obviously the first thing they've got to make a decision about is how to proceed on health reform. Were 60 votes in the Senate key to getting health reform passed? Do you see a path to health reform now by the State of the Union, by February, that doesn't include having a 60th Democratic senator?
There's only 2 ways you can do this. One is to get the Senate to pass the House bill and then fix it later. And I think you're going to have a hard time with that, because the Senate bill is not that strong a bill because of the intervention of Senator Lieberman and Senator Nelson. The other thing is to start over again and just add Medicare, add 55-year-olds and up to Medicare, which is what the Senate was thinking about doing in the first place. There's a big advantage if you do that. You don't get universal insurance, and you don't get insurance reform, but frankly, the Senate bill has very little real insurance reform in it anyway. What you do is get people insured right away who don't have insurance now and who can't get it because they're over 55. So I think that kind of approach is the approach that I would use. Get it done, have it easy to understand. Expansion of Medicare is very easy to understand. You can run it through reconciliation pretty quickly. You don't have any choice, because if you're going to get anything done on health care from now on in the Senate, it's going to be through reconciliation.
Governor Dean, thank you very much. We've got to take a quick break right now, and then we're going to be checking in with Scott Brown's campaign headquarters in downtown Boston. We're live at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain here in Massachusetts. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching MSNBC's coverage of the United States Senate race in the great state of Massachusetts. The Associated Press projecting that Scott Brown, Republican state senator, has defeated the Democratic candidate Martha Coakley, the state's attorney general, longtime public servant. I'm Rachel Maddow, and I'm here at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, with a very raucous, very friendly, very drinky crowd on election night here. Joining us now from Republican State Senator Scott Brown's headquarters in downtown Boston is MSNBC's chief Washington correspondent, Norah O'Donnell. Norah, thanks very much for joining us. Tell us what's going on there.
Good evening, Rachel. That's right. Scott Brown has received a phone call from Martha Coakley. In fact, I'm told by sources she called at 9:13 p.m. to concede this race to the Republican Scott Brown. Scott Brown's daughter, Isla, who was on American Idol, had been performing on stage singing with the Doug Flutie Band. She stopped and announced that to the crowd, who erupted in cheers. Since then, they've been shouting, "Yes, we can," and "John Kerry's next." So there you go. This is a packed ballroom, clearly excited that Scott Brown won tonight. He is expected to come out and speak shortly. I imagine that he is waiting for a call from President Barack Obama. The president's spokesman had indicated earlier this week that the president would call and congratulate whoever the winner was, whether it was the Democrat or the Republican. What's next? Well, it remains to be seen when the Secretary of State certifies this election. We've done some reporting today, our excellent political team, that the Secretary of State here in Massachusetts could take 10 days to certify this election. That would give the Democrats in Washington, if they want it, some time if they wanted to do something with the health care reform, given all these different alternatives now. Now the Republicans have 41 votes in the United States Senate. So that's one thing to watch for. And of course, in the next couple of days, we're going to be hearing all about the autopsy of the Martha Coakley campaign. What went wrong? As I told you earlier, I'm stunned by the finger pointing that's gone on. A Democratic Party official sending me a note and talking to me in person saying, let's be clear, and saying Martha Coakley was on vacation, on a break in between that key 3-week period between December 19th and January 5th when her 20-point lead was halved to just 10 points. They blame Martha Coakley. They blame her campaign. They say she gave it away to Scott Brown, let him go up on the air, let him define her, and that's how she lost this particular campaign. But surely there's enough blame to go around because the Democrats in Washington were also perhaps thinking that Martha Coakley was going to easily win this. And as I spoke with Vicki Kennedy yesterday, and something she said was very clear that most people who run for political office know, don't ever take a vote for granted. You should never take a vote for granted. And I think that's one of the big lessons, is that many people think Martha Coakley took this for granted because it's Massachusetts, because Democrats outnumber Republicans 3-1, that maybe she would win this. And so that key 3-week period is when Scott Brown got the momentum and was able to define this race. And now why there's a victory party here, and we're expecting to hear from him shortly. Rachel?
NBC's Nora O'Donnell at Scott Brown campaign headquarters. A sense of the enthusiasm there by the rollicking cheer from the crowd just for the podium coming out. We do expect, of course, Scott Brown to be speaking tonight. That's not happening quite yet, but we will bring that to you live here when it happens on MSNBC, the place for politics. Stay with us. We'll be right back after a break. MSNBC's live coverage of the results of the United States Senate race, the special election to replace the late Ted Kennedy here in Massachusetts, continues. Nora O'Donnell just being told by the Scott Brown campaign that President Obama has phoned Scott Brown, Republican Scott Brown, to congratulate him on his victory tonight. More ahead. Stay with us. Welcome back to our live coverage of the United States Senate race in the great state of Massachusetts. The Associated Press having called the race for Scott Brown, the Republican candidate, with 52% of the vote, over Martha Coakley, the Democrats, 47%. That's with 92% of precincts reporting. I'm Rachel Maddow, live at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain here in Massachusetts. Open questions here right now include the question of when Senator Scott Brown will be seated, when he will actually take office as the United States Senator. The Secretary of State in Massachusetts today pledging that would happen as soon as possible. You're looking at pictures right now of Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick at the Martha Coakley headquarters. Of course, we're expecting to hear from State Attorney General Martha Coakley. Also looking there at John Kerry, United States Senator, the senior United States Senator. His junior member will now be a Republican. When Scott Brown is sworn in, he will be Massachusetts' first Republican United States Senator since 1978. We're looking at pictures right now from Martha Coakley's headquarters.
Thank you.
We'll go live to the podium there.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for everything you did today and throughout this campaign. I know you all worked very hard.
Martha Coakley's headquarters. Chris Matthews is here with me at Doyle's Pub in Jamaica. We've also got Nora O'Donnell on standby at Scott Brown's headquarters in downtown Boston. Can I bring Chris into this discussion? Chris, rating right now, obviously, for Martha Coakley's statement on her loss. This is a race that Scott Brown is being credited with certainly having won, but this was the Democrats to give away. Are there going to be recriminations here in terms of Democratic politics?
Yeah, I think one thing I want to do at midnight tonight is go through the endangered Democrats, the ones who worry very much right now. Certainly Blanche Lincoln is worried. A conservative Democrat, relatively conservative Democrat.
Because as goes Massachusetts, so goes Arkansas.
As goes Massachusetts, anything can happen. That's what I think. If you can beat him here, you can beat him anywhere. So Arlen Specter, he is definitely worried. Certainly Harry Reid is worried. Even people we thought of as sort of the lucky people in political history, like Evan Bayh, have to worry. Because they don't know now, because it's uncertain. This is what I quoted from William Allen White, the great Midwestern editor. People are dissatisfied. They don't know who to blame, but they have a target, the incumbent, whoever it is. And when you get to the blame game, do we blame the president? Do we blame the Democratic Party structure for not having gone to her aid? Do we blame the candidate? There's a lot of suspects out there.
Well, it seems to me that that politicking matters, as you were saying earlier, that it's old school politicking, but it's really about running a good campaign. We saw in Virginia that a lot of people looked at the Cree Deeds race and said, oh, this is a referendum on Obama. A lot of Democrats looked at that and thought, Cree Deeds ran a really bad campaign. And in Massachusetts right now, that's going to be part of the autopsy. Whether or not Martha Coakley ran a bad enough campaign, Democrats put up so poor a fight for this seat that it's more about this individual race than it is about Barack Obama.
Great example in Massachusetts history. In 1952, Dwight Eisenhower, Republican, swept this state. Guess who won the Senate race? Jack Kennedy.
Yeah.
So you don't always go down because the president's unpopular or the party's not popular. A lot of times people discriminate. They go and, I think I like this guy, but I don't like that guy.
Sure.
Pennsylvania's been splitting its ticket at the top for all my life. So I do think people know, but I think there is you and I are in the same world. We deal all the time in the cosmos we live in, the zeitgeist, the spirit of the times, are unhappy. There's a dissatisfaction out there. It may be the cold winter. It may be the unemployment rate, which is not going down. People react. I've always believed that you can trust economic circumstances to give you a fabulous reading on the mood of the country. Richard Nixon, people say, what do you mean, he covered up a break-in and he lost his presidency over that? No, the times were terrible economically. Bill Clinton embarrassed us with Monica, but you know what? The times were great. And I'm Marxist when it comes to analysis. People judge their current economic circumstances, and then they make political judgments.
This is one of those nights, though, when we can be absolute purists in terms of extrapolating from this one race, because there was only one race. This is the only race happening anywhere in the country right now. You look at Massachusetts. Massachusetts' unemployment rate is better than or worse than the national unemployment rate. It's actually better. It's about 8.8, which sucks, but it's not 10. You look at the president's approval ratings in this state, they're 10 points better than they are in the rest of the country. So if you're trying to say what's going on economically is shaping the way people feel about the party in power as represented by the president, it's not borne out by the numbers in this state. I think politicking, campaigning, whether or not you're actually trying, makes a difference.
Okay, let me give you your point. You make a point. The New York Times poll, the New York Times yesterday reported that among Massachusetts voters who liked the president, Martha Coakley was down. So that makes your point. So there were people that went to the polls today who said if I had to vote on the president today, I would have voted for Obama.
Yeah.
But I'm not voting for the other candidate. I'm not voting for Martha Coakley.
Candidates matter. Campaigns matter. Martha, you know what I felt like, what I was seeing when I was looking at this race was George Bush versus John Kerry. That you had a very charismatic, very aggressive campaigning guy who had policies that were actually pretty far to the right of most of the country. And then you had somebody who's sort of lifelong public servant with this resume that, you'd tattoo on yourself if you could, and he ends up looking like the sap, and he ends up the guy who doesn't run a very aggressive campaign, assumes that his lifetime of service is going to be the thing that stands him up, and he doesn't win it. He can't pull it off.
Yeah, I remember putting together on my Sunday show a bit of tape, and it's always anecdotal and unfair, but there's George W. Bush, who I'm not impressed with in terms of his leadership and his decisions. But he walked into a little dinette with a little family there, and he said hello to the boys and the girls, and he said, hey, fella, it must be tough having all these sisters. Quick connection.
Yeah.
John Kerry came in, he found a woman like you sitting trying to read a book, and he started telling her about some GPO report or something, and I go, what are you doing to this woman? She wants her lunch. She wants to read this book. truck, and it wasn't right.
Yeah.
So you're right. Sometimes we judge people on how they approach us, and maybe that's idiotic, but it's part of democracy. You know.
I'm here with Chris Matthews in Doyle's Pub in Jamaica Plain, and we're looking right now at Martha Coakley, Massachusetts State Attorney General, former Middlesex County District Attorney, former county prosecutor. She's born in North Adams, Massachusetts. Degrees from Boston University, BU Law School, and from Williams College. Let's listen to Martha Coakley now.
I don't know. Somebody told me there was a crowd out here. Thank you. Thank you. I want you to know that I just got off the phone with Scott Brown. I've offered him my congratulations and my best wishes on his victory tonight. And I wish to him and Gail and to his 2 daughters, and I told him, Mr. Brown, you've got 2 lovely daughters, which he does. And he also extended his good wishes to me. And so I wish we were here with other and better news tonight, but we are not. And I want to take this moment, first of all, for all of you in this room and those of you who are probably still out working. You poured your hearts and souls into this campaign, and there are thousands of you, literally. We had thousands of people out on the street since September, and I want to say a incredibly sincere thank you for everything that you did, obviously not just for me, but for the campaign and what we stood for in this campaign. And so let's give yourselves a huge round of applause for what you've done. Thank you. Thank you. I will not forget the fierce determination with which we approach this, not just again about this campaign, about the things we believed in and we still believe in and we will still fight for and on after tonight. And I know you will join me in that. We never lost our focus or our determination, and you never demonstrated an ounce of discouragement or complacency as far as I'm concerned in this campaign. I know how hard we worked, and you own everything about this campaign. You were there every step of the way as we went forward in the primary and through tonight and focused on the issues that I believe everybody in Massachusetts does care about and everybody in this country should be focused on as we go forward. I want to say a very sincere and loving thank you to my husband, Tom. Thank you. I had him out on the campaign trail for the last couple days, and I can tell you there are at least 2 dogs who are very happy about tonight's results because we're going to be back with them. I have to thank my family, many of whom are here behind me tonight. My sisters, Anne and Jane and Mary, are all here. My nephews and nieces and grandnieces. Terrific staff on our campaign. If you worked with our staff, with Kevin and Dennis and ML and everybody else who gave sweat, blood, and tears and all of their time to this campaign, you know how much heart and soul we put into it. And it was my honor to be working with them and with you during this campaign. You've in some ways become an extended family for me. As I tell my folks in the AG's office, my extended dysfunctional family, but that's okay. I will never forget the passion and the energy and the soul that we brought to this, and that includes the friendship of everybody who's worked with us. Of course, I know you'll join me in thanking President Obama, who took this little trip to see us here on Sunday. He actually just called me, and before I came on stage, to say that we can't win them all, and he knows that better than any, as he told me. But he appreciates what I did and what you did, and he said to extend his Heartfelt thanks to everybody who'd worked on the campaign. And as I know from losing a campaign several years ago, writing a little piece about it for the Herald, that I feel very strongly about. If you do not run, you cannot win. And you don't always win all of the time, but you put in your best efforts, because sometimes it's more important to travel hopefully than to arrive. And in some ways, and we will continue to travel, hopefully. I know that. I know that many of you had the great pleasure of seeing President Clinton as he was out on the campaign trail. I want to thank him. And particularly, I need to send my thanks, and I know yours, to Vicki Kennedy, who campaigned with me all weekend. To Vicki, who was the source of, as she always was, her dignity and grace and her warmth and good humor. And on one occasion, when she gave me a good tip, she said, "I'm channeling my inner Ted," and was incredibly great along the campaign trail. So I have to thank her. And I know, although our campaign ends tonight, we know that our mission continues and our work goes on. I am heartbroken at the result, and I know that you are also, but I know that we will get up together tomorrow and continue this fight, even with this result tonight, because there will be plenty of Wednesday morning quarterbacking about what happened and what went right, what went wrong, and I know that everyone, including me, I am brutally honest on my own performances. We will be honest about the assessment of this race. And although I am very disappointed, I always respect the voters' choice, and that's what I told to Scott Brown tonight. And again, we wish him luck in his public service. Anyone who's been out on the campaign trail, particularly in this race, has seen the anger of folks who are frustrated, concerned. They are angry about health care issues, and they're angry about our two wars, our inability to properly care for those who return home after fighting. I had hoped, in the best interests of our state and the country, to go to Washington to address these issues. I hope that as a nation and as a Commonwealth, we can do better in the future. You know that as your Attorney General, I will continue to fight and address them here with everybody in Massachusetts who cares about these issues. Thank you. So for me and for you, tonight this campaign comes to an end, but there's plenty of work to do here in Massachusetts and as we continue to organize for America. And so we will always remember our terrific Senator Ted Kennedy and his words, "The work begins anew, the hope rises again, and the dream lives on." Thank you.
And good evening again from New York. The outcome from Massachusetts tonight supposed to have been a foregone conclusion. How do you hold a special election to fill Senator Edward M. Kennedy's Senate seat, the one he held for 47 years, and not expect the Democrat to be the easy victor? Instead tonight, the Boston Globe reporting that even before the race had been called, the Democrat Martha Coakley, who just finished her remarks there, conceding in a phone call to Republican Scott Brown, as I like to say in sports about that speech you just saw, and the campaign, get a roll of stamps and mail it in. Minutes later, the Associated Press made their official call, projecting Scott Brown the winner of the special election to replace Ted Kennedy in the United States Senate. The numbers to this point, as of this hour, are really besides the point. At 52-47, with 93% of the vote in, Brown to become the 41st Republican in the 100-member Senate, 41.5 counting Mr. Lieberman, which could allow the GOP to block the president's health care reform legislation, what had been the defining issue of Senator Kennedy's career, in a special electoral system set up by Democrats in power in Massachusetts. It is Schadenfreude in its original definition. The Democratic blame game began well ahead of tonight's poll closings, let alone the vote count. A Democratic official telling MSNBC this evening, before polls closed, that Mr. Brown had been able to close the gap and then lap Coakley because, quote, the Democratic candidate was literally on a vacation. In turn, the Coakley campaign blamed national Democratic officials for the expected loss. Let's go first to Norah O'Donnell, who's standing by at the campaign headquarters of Scott Brown, the senator-elect from Massachusetts. And I don't think anybody would have believed us if we had said we were going to be doing this conversation in terms of the senator-elect from Massachusetts, Mr. Brown, as recently as a month ago. Are there words to describe the feeling there, Norah?
Well, this is clearly a huge upset, a shock for Democrats who did not think, certainly a month ago, that this race would even be close. I have to report to you, I have spoken with a senior advisor to Scott Brown, who reports that President Barack Obama has called Brown to congratulate him. We are expecting to hear from Brown any moment now. This is a big win for Republicans in this state. Why? Because the last time a Republican held this seat was in 1952 when JFK beat Henry Cabot Lodge for this seat. So as one Democratic official joked to me, every Republican in Massachusetts is here in this ballroom because it's not so often that the Republicans get a chance to celebrate. So they are happy here tonight. The other big thing I think that's worth reporting to is on what this means for health care reform, what it means for President Barack Obama's agenda. Look very closely at the statement that Senator Jim Webb, Democrat of Virginia, has just put out. He said it would be wise to wait until Scott Brown is seated in the United States before they move forward on health care reform. Pretty interesting shot across the bow, or warning, whatever you want to call it, from Senator Jim Webb, because as you know, there's been a discussion that it would take the Secretary of State at least about 10 days to certify Scott Brown, and then of course you have to wait till Biden's ready to swear him in and get him into office. And so there was some talk that maybe the Democrats in the Senate could try and push this bill before that. Now you have Jim Webb saying, let's hold our horses. It would be wise to wait until he's seated. And then the other note, just to a T, just about almost every Democratic congressman that we've talked to does not seem to have the appetite to want to take the Senate bill and just pass it as is so that it can go directly to the president's desk. So there are some real concerns tonight by Democratic Party officials about just how health care reform that President Barack Obama promised could ever get done. Keith?
Well, I think the word is reconciliation. MSNBC's Norah O'Donnell at Senator-elect Scott Brown's headquarters in Boston. Many thanks. Let's try to analyze what happened. We go to the Jamaica Plain neighborhood of Boston. Our own Chris Matthews and Rachel Maddow have been holding down the fort there, perhaps more than metaphorically. Let's find out. That point that was just raised by Norah O'Donnell, Chris. Is there a way to hold up the Senate vote after the Senate has voted already? And what Jim Webb just said about nothing should be voted on finally until the seating of Senator-elect Brown?
Well, this is a lot of this has to do with procedure. There's a 10-day period of certification where you go town by town and clarify exactly what the result was, and that could be a formality because when Ted Kennedy picked up this seat in a special election in '62, he was seated the very next day. So some of this is ritual, some is precedent, but Jim Webb, I think, has made some noise here by warning the Democrats not to vote with the lame duck appointed Paul Kirk in Ted Kennedy's seat.
Rachel, what are your thoughts on this, and what is the meaning of Jim Webb, of all people, stepping in on this, former Reagan administration naval secretary? What is it seems so odd for him to have jumped in and for him to have jumped in, both the timing and the person. What do you think of it?
Keith, I think it points up what Howard Dean was saying on our air earlier, which is that Democrats are going to have to decide if the lesson here is to be more centrist and to try to do less, or to really try to get things done. And as you and I have been talking about on both of our shows for months, and Chris has too, you end up with a much more progressive, ambitious health reform proposal if you're not shooting at this perhaps mythical idea of 60 votes in the first place. Either you do something to neuter the filibuster, or you pass something through reconciliation, or you pass something that's very bare bones with as many senators as you can bring on board, and then you work out the hard details through reconciliation. There are ways to do this, but this may actually be the thing that forces Democrats to be way more progressive than they were otherwise going to be, because they're no longer chasing that mythical 60.
Chris, what about that? Is that I think I attributed it to Ed Koch 2 hours ago, who said when he was the first-term mayor of New York that he was going to make sure that he got a second term by not even thinking about it as he governed. That the idea was do what it is you want to do, and that's going to lead to your second term. And if it doesn't, at least you got done in your first term what you wanted to get done and what you got elected to get to. Did the Democrats find themselves in this position tonight because they were too liberal, or because they weren't liberal enough?
Well, let's push forward right from, we don't know. I mean, I can't read the voting motives of everybody up here, even a day that it happened. But let me tell you, along the lines of what you've been talking about for months now, I've been back studying that book about what LBJ did to get civil rights through. Now, remember, Jack Kennedy, when he was alive, from up here, couldn't get civil rights through because there was a bunch of Dixiecrats sitting on that, running that Rules Committee in the House. So you know what Johnson did? He had a discharge petition. He got so many votes, over 200. He scared the bejesus out of that chairman of that Rules Committee, went around it. He said, okay, pass the civil rights bill by December of the year Jack Kennedy was killed. So within a month, they got it done. You know what he did on the Senate side? He skipped the Judiciary Committee, went right around it. He went to the Senate Democrats. He said, okay, I want you to pass all the crap that's on the agenda right now so a filibuster doesn't get in the way of anything. Passed all the junk that was waiting in line. Everything was done. Then he let him talk for 2 months, and then he got Dirksen and went around the Judiciary Committee and got cloture. Now, there's a lot of things you have to do to break precedent if something's really important. If they decide in the Democratic caucus that they can get 50 votes and the vice president's tie-breaking vote, if they can do that, now that's the if, they might well go for it. That's the question. To me, it's a question of practicality. If they can hold the 50, not the 59, hold 50, that's all you need, not 51, and the vice president, they can push through a good bit of the structure, the fiscal structure of health care reform. The other way to do it is to take the House and try to get them to buy the Senate version with the absolute commitment from the president and the leadership that there will be a reconciliation bill through both houses this spring, which will correct the problems the House members have with the Senate bill. Now, it will take a lot of thrust and a lot of guts, but that's the only route to the Indies, as far as I'm concerned. If you're Christopher Columbus on this, it's the only route, because they're not going to get Olympia Snowe. They're not going to get Susan Collins. Let's face it, that's not going to happen. And they're not going to get 60 votes any other way. So they got a simple question now: do they want a health care bill or don't they? And they may have to go either with those two rules, reconciliation, which you suggest, which is doable, or a synthesis. Go with the House, tell the House, buy the Senate bill, and we'll fix all the problems in a big reconciliation bill this spring and give you guys what you need to justify it at home this November, and then you will win. But if you don't do this, you will lose. Now, he's got to threaten them with that. He's got to tell the Democrats, if you don't do health care the toughest way, because we're going to have to do it the toughest way, and that means you, Rahm Emanuel, you got to do the work here. You got to really do the work. We can do it. But the only other alternative to me is to fall on your sword and give up. Yeah. And I do think that's the route. And Bill Clinton will give that speech a few hundred times. That's the route to defeat big time, maybe lose 50 seats, lose the speakership, and maybe lose the majority of the Senate as well. Because after tonight, they got to get the message that they can lose Arkansas, they can easily lose Indiana, they can get killed in Pennsylvania, and even Barbara Boxer might have a race on her hands if this climate of discontent and dissatisfaction with government not being able to do anything continues. Inability to act is the biggest Democratic problem right now, I think, between now and November. Inability to act. The climate ain't going to change. The economy's not going to change. They got to prove they can act. That's what I think is the question between now and November.
Is that any,
I think.
Yeah, Rachel, got any hints, helpful hints on how we can get those Democrats to do that, or how they can get those Democrats to do that? They don't seem to have been willing to do it with a 60-vote majority. Now they're going to have to. Now they're basically addition by subtraction. Is that what this is?
Any Democrat who can count to 2, any Democrat who knows how to spell their own name, any Democrat who can figure out how to work a television remote control knows right now that health care cannot die unless the Democratic Party is going to die with it. This is it. Democrats have to pass it. There's no if they decide to pass it. There's no when they decide to pass it. No. This is, Chris is absolutely right in terms of the political stakes here. Whatever you want to call health reform, something called health reform must pass, and it must pass within, 30 days, or the Democratic Party is going to have a really big problem for a really long time that no individual election cycle is going to be able to get them out of. This is an exclamation point on these results tonight for Democrats. Health care must pass.
You watch. It'll be a new bill. It'll be a bill supporting child-proof bottles. Rachel Maddow, Chris Matthews, great thanks. They will be intricately involved in our MSNBC coverage continuing throughout the night. Rachel is back live at the top of the hour, 11 p.m. Eastern. Chris will be back live again with a special edition of Hardball starting at midnight Eastern. As we await Senator-elect Brown's speech, will the Democratic loss in Massachusetts indeed kill health care reform? Representative Anthony Weiner said it might. Speaker Pelosi says reform will still happen. Lawrence O'Donnell joins us. But before we get to that, I have to apologize for comments I made about Senator-elect Brown last night. A quick comment next. Lawrence O'Donnell joins me next on the future of health care reform, but first we stay in Massachusetts for the first of tonight's quick comments. I wanted to apologize for calling Senator-elect Scott Brown an irresponsible, homophobic, racist, reactionary, ex-nude model, teabagging supporter of violence against women and against politicians with whom he disagrees. I'm sorry. I left out the word sexist. And I left out the story of the day Brown, upset by online criticism from some students, went to the school and swore at the entire student body. I'm very sorry. For all the blowback from the right on this comment, from people who regularly mutter worse things about Barack Obama in their sleep, when it came to the facts that I cited to paint this picture of this horrifically unqualified senator-elect, we have heard nothing. No contrary evidence, no refutation, not even a plausible excuse. And to the point of excuse, it can be argued that Brown should have been given the benefit of the doubt after a supporter shouted at him that they should shove a curling iron up Martha Coakley's butt. That he did not hear that when Brown then said, we can do this, he was not responding to the lunatic in the crowd. But the Boston Globe makes an unanswerable point about that. Even if Brown really didn't hear it, where was his later statement decrying the obscenity and violence his supporter had suggested? Not only did Mr. Brown not offer even the mildest reproach, but when pressed by by Senator Kerry, Brown replied only that people are tired of John Kerry's partisan politics. In Senator-elect Brown, we have an irresponsible, homophobic, racist, reactionary, sexist ex-nude model, teabagging supporter of violence against women and against politicians with whom he disagrees. And if he or you don't like that characterization, my answer to you is simple. Disprove it. Because he hasn't. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts sent Republican State Senator Scott Brown to the U.S. Senate tonight, potentially crippling efforts to give the U.S. a health care system that would still not be as progressive as the one in Massachusetts. We're awaiting the senator-elect's speech in Boston tonight. In the interim, before the first votes were cast today, top Democrats in Washington were both offering assurances they could find other ways to pass health care without their 60-vote supermajority in the Senate, and also writing its obituary. Congressman Anthony Weiner saying you can make a pretty good argument that health care might be dead. But restorative measures were underway. The White House reportedly is pushing for Congress to bypass the Senate by having the House simply vote on the exact bill that already passed the Senate instead of the compromise bill now being worked on by congressional negotiators, and to send that to the president for his signature. House Speaker Pelosi has previously poured cold water on that option. This afternoon, she suggested it will not be necessary, though she did not explain why.
Our eye is on the ball of passing legislation. In order to do that, we have to resolve some differences, establish some priorities, make some decisions, and that's what we're doing. Whatever happens in Massachusetts, we have to do that. And whatever happens in Massachusetts, we will have quality, affordable health care for all Americans, and it will be soon.
But earlier, Democratic House Leader Steny Hoyer had given momentum to speculation the House might simply send the president the Senate's bill when he said, quote, better than nothing. One scenario still floating. The Democrats pick up the pace and somehow beat Brown to the Senate, getting a compromise bill finished in time to hold a Senate vote, killing a filibuster on the new bill before Brown is sworn in, which could come as early as the end of this month, but might come sooner than that after what Senator Jim Webb said on behalf of a small group of Democratic senators in the House just now, that no action should be taken until the changeover of the Senate in the Senate's seat from Massachusetts is accomplished. Joining us now, a man who knows Massachusetts and knows health care reform, MSNBC political analyst Lawrence O'Donnell, contributor at Huffington Post and former chief of staff for the Senate Finance Committee. Good to see you.
Good to be here, Keith.
All right, let's start with Jim Webb. What is this all about? What did he say?
Well, he's saying, in effect, he's taking this as the warning shot to Democrats. Back off from a liberal agenda pushing out in that direction. He probably represents 10 quiet senators who come from states that do have strong Republican votes in them. And so there's going to be a lot of cold feet, House and Senate. Nancy Pelosi does have some goodwill on her side. I talked to some Democratic members of the House today, and they all anticipated this loss tonight, everyone, unanimously. And some of them who I would have expected to be opposed to going forward with anything close to the Senate bill have said to me, let's see what Nancy can do. Let's see if she can pull a rabbit out of the hat in the House. We don't know. There's an interesting comment from Harry Reid tonight. I just got his comment over the BlackBerry. He says the people of Massachusetts have spoken. We welcome Scott Brown to the Senate and will move to seat him as soon as the proper paperwork has been received. Okay. Now, this goes back to Chris's point earlier. Ted Kennedy, when he was elected, special election seated the next day. There is paperwork to do. There is a certification to do in Massachusetts. It does take close to 2 weeks to do it. That seems to be a statement by Harry Reid saying, we're going to make you deliver us the full documentation to seat him.
All right, but clearly people like Anthony Weiner don't want that Senate bill, and many others in the House. A lot of progressives didn't want the Senate bill beforehand, let alone the Senate bill on a take it or leave it basis. You have that. You have progressives who do not want this bill to pass in this form and say there's got to be something better that could be passed, perhaps at that 51 vote margin and perhaps by reconciliation. How is this actually going to turn out? How is this going to end? You've already been proved pretty much correct on a prediction from months ago that it would be March before anything actually happens. So that would seem like speedy activity here.
It's easy for me to predict delay in these processes, and it's easy for me to predict what pieces are going to fall out along the way. Like, it was easy for me to see in August they were going to lose the public option no matter what they said, because I could see where the weakness was and how they would surrender, basically. We are now in completely uncharted territory. So I don't have a weather map to look at here. I don't hear everything I hear. Every scenario people come up with, I can sit here and tell you why it won't work. But I don't know. Maybe this is the time they land the plane on the Hudson. I just have never seen anyone, any process that could get beyond what's happening tonight. Losing that 60th vote, as far as every maneuver I know, loses you the bill. Because what everyone has to remember about reconciliation, there'll be a huge demand for it. Reconciliation requires 60 votes every single day on several procedural parliamentary motions that come up during a reconciliation bill. And if you don't win those parliamentary motions, your bill gets ripped apart. And even then, within the rules of reconciliation, it's impossible to do some of the elements of health care reform because of the rules of reconciliation. So I'm sitting here saying I don't see how you go forward from here. I don't know what the play is. But listen, Harry Reid has done an amazing job getting a bill out of the Senate in any form. Nancy Pelosi's done an amazing job getting the bill out of the House in any form. I'd never seen that happen before either. So surprise me again.
Child-proof bottles.
Okay.
I'm telling you, that's where it's going to end up. As we watch Mitt Romney come to the stage here in anticipation of Senator-elect Brown, we'll thank Lawrence O'Donnell of MSNBC and the Huffington Post. Good to see you.
Thanks, Keith.
Even before the polls were closed in Massachusetts today, the behind-the-scenes blame game on the failures of the Coakley campaign had already started, the political finger-pointing, and everybody seems to have 17 fingers. And what this will all mean for the president and the Democrats going forward in the regular 2010 elections, and also Senator-elect Brown's speech ahead on Countdown.
Thank you. Yes, I did this morning. Thank you. And I hope they're paying close attention, because tonight the independent voice of Massachusetts has spoken. From the Berkshires to Boston, from Springfield to Cape Cod, the voters of this Commonwealth defied the odds and the experts. Tonight, the independent majority has delivered a great victory. I thank the people of Massachusetts for electing me as your next United States Senator. And every day I hold this office, I will give all that is in me to serve you well and make you proud. And most of all, I will remember, thank you, most of all, I will remember that while the honor is mine, this Senate seat belongs to no one person, no one political party, and as I said before, and you've heard it today and you'll hear it loud and clear, this is the people's seat. Thank you very much. I spoke to interim Senator Paul Kirk, and he has completed his work as a senator. I spoke to Senator Kirk, and he was very gracious. He said that he would help in the transition. He welcomes me as soon as I can get there, and I want to thank him from the bottom of my heart. I want to thank him. And I want to thank him very much. The people, as you know by their votes, have now filled the office themselves, and I'm ready to go to Washington without delay. I also want to thank Martha Coakley for her call of congratulations. A hard contest is behind us, and now we must come together as a Commonwealth. Thank you, Martha. As you know, this special election came about because we lost someone very, very dear to Massachusetts and to America. Senator Ted Kennedy was a tireless worker and a big-hearted public servant, and for most of his lifetime was a force like no other in this state. The first call I made was to his wife, Vicki, and I told her that his name will always command the affection and respect by the people of Massachusetts, and I said we feel the same about her. There's no replacing a man like that, but tonight I honor the memory, and I pledge to be the very best and try to be a worthy successor to the late Senator Kennedy. And I said at the very beginning when I sat down at the dinner table with my family that win or lose, we would run a race which would make all of us proud. I kept my word, and we ran a clean, issues-oriented, upbeat campaign, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. And when I first started running, I asked for a lot of help because I knew it was going to be me against the machine. I was wrong. It was all of us against the machine. And tonight we have shown everybody now that you are the machine. I'm glad my mom and dad, my brothers and sisters, and so many family members are here tonight. It means a lot to me, and I thank them very much. And once again, before I go any further, I want to introduce somebody very, very special to me. You haven't seen much of her on the campaign trail. I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Gail. As you know, my wife, Gail, couldn't join me on the campaign trail because of work as a Boston TV journalist, but I will let you in on a little secret.
No secrets.
No secrets. She didn't stay neutral today. She actually voted for the winner. And as always, I rely on Gail's love and support and that of our two lovely daughters. So I want to thank Ayla and Ariana for their help as well. And just in case anybody who's watching throughout the country, yes, they're both available. No. Only kidding. Ariana definitely is not available, but Ayla is. This is Ariana, and this is Ayla. Well, I can see I'm going to get in trouble when I get home. But Ariana will be returning in a day or two to her studies pre-med at Syracuse, and because she's been giving her all to this campaign, and as always, her sister and Ayla have been, Ayla and Ariana obviously have been a joy to Gail and me, and we're so grateful to them both for their professionalism and their love and excitement and zest for life, and even for her campaign performances. In front of millions of people. You've heard Ayla's voice already on American Idol, and as a Boston College basketball player, many fans know that she's also pretty good on the court. And the reason I bring that up is because when I spoke to the president tonight, I asked the president, because he has a couple of basketball courts there. when I spoke to the president, the first thing I said, would you like me to drive the truck down to Washington so you can see it?
Before we get to the chowder recipes of the family, we're going to take a pause to discuss this. Before the polls had closed in Massachusetts tonight, Democratic officials in that state and around the country had come together to agree on one point. The Martha Coakley Senate campaign was a crappy one. What they disagree on and might all be wrong about is why. When Tuesday was only 29 minutes old, Politico.com posted a story quoting unnamed Hill sources that claimed Rahm Emanuel, White House Chief of Staff, was blaming Coakley, as well as the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, for having botched the race. An unnamed advisor to Coakley pushed back early this afternoon with an email titled, "National Dems failed to aid Coakley until too late," though several of its factual claims have already been called into question. By late afternoon, Coakley pollster Celinda Lake, reportedly another object of Mr. Emanuel's wrath, became one of the few putting their own names on the recriminations, telling Huffington Post that Republican challenger Brown, now the senator-elect who campaigned as a pickup-driving everyman, just happens to be a lawyer, surged because he became the change-oriented candidate. Voters are still voting for the change they voted for in 2008, but they want to see it. And right now they think they've got economic policies from Washington that are delivering more for banks than Main Street. Lake adding, as did at least one unnamed Democrat in D.C., that there's a lot of blame to go around. A Democratic strategist telling Politico the party lost independents in Virginia, New Jersey, and Massachusetts races, and, quote, the only thing those three states have in common is Obama. Let's bring in the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Huffington Post, Arianna Huffington. Good evening, Arianna.
Good evening, Keith. I didn't know that Scott Brown's one daughter is called Arianna. I just found that out.
I guess a mixture of pride and not pride for you on that. We found everything else out about the family there as it began to sort of turn into American Idol meets Who Wants to Be a Senator. Your initial takeaway from tonight's outcome is what?
My initial takeaway is that this could actually be a blessing in disguise for the Democrats. I know the disguise is very heavy, but this is their chance to course correct. Celinda Lake was absolutely right. This is a referendum on the administration's and Congress's policies towards Wall Street. And if they interpret it that way, and if they course correct, they can actually prevent what was coming to them in 2010, which is potentially losing the House and the Senate. There is time to course correct. It has to start with the White House. The president has to actually take a trip to a metaphorical mountaintop and remember why he ran, why he got elected, and why when he now goes and campaigns for Martha Coakley and talks about special interests and fighting the status quo, he's not believed because he is the status quo. He is in charge of all three branches of government.
The Democratic Senator Evan Bayh told ABC News tonight that Democrats need to make common cause with independents and with moderates. Isn't that exactly how the Democrats got into this position in Massachusetts? And does President Obama get that, do you think?
Well, I think the problem with Massachusetts is that Democrats became partners of the special interests and the status quo. The problem is not with independents and moderates. It's with the fact that Billy Townsend, the chief lobbyist for pharma, the head of pharma, visited the White House 11 times in the first 6 months. The fact that, as Dick Durbin said, the banks basically are in charge of what's happening on the Hill. This is the fundamental problem. The Democrats, starting with the White House, need to demonstrate to the American people that they are on their side of middle-class families deathly worried about losing jobs, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. And, you know, I love Rachel, but I completely disagree with her. The way to do that is not to fight for a broken health care bill that over 50% of Americans are against, moderates, independents, progressives, and conservatives. The way to do that is to fight for jobs, to fight against the banks that are about this week to give out ridiculous bonuses while middle-class Americans are hurting. This is the priority. There is time to course correct, but they need to course correct in the right direction.
In the next couple of days, we saw it, as we mentioned, past the stroke of midnight last night, the finger pointing, and everybody has 17 fingers, pointing as to whose responsibility this is, kind of lets slip through the cracks things like Senator-elect Brown sort of humiliating his daughters there, which is kind of a trivial point, but more importantly, the senator-elect referred several times to his being something like an independent, and the audience there certainly believed that that's what they were, and they were representing independent values. Statistically, Senator-elect Brown, in his state role in Massachusetts, voted 90% of the time with the Republicans in 2006, but since 2007, he had increased that to 96% of the time. What kind of snake oil salesman gets up there and says, I'm not a Republican and you're not Republicans and we didn't vote Republican?
Well, you know what, Keith? In the end, we can say a lot of things about Scott Brown and a lot of things about Martha Coakley and what a lackluster candidate she was. But in the end, this is not about Massachusetts, and this is not about Scott Brown and Martha Coakley. This is about the National Democratic Party that has lost its way. And this is the time to course correct. And that's why I'm actually, in the end, optimistic that this could turn out to be a good night for Democrats if they learn the right lessons. If they listen to Evan Bayh and to Joe Lieberman, who are telling them to go to some kind of mythical middle, which is exactly where the status quo is, while upping the rhetoric but not changing their actions, then unfortunately the lessons of tonight will have been missed.
Arianna Huffington, who had the name first before the daughter of Senator-elect Brown did, of the Huffington Post. Great, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Democrats lose that 60-vote supermajority. They still have the 59-vote not-so-supermajority. And could that, as Arianna just suggested, actually turn into a political benefit for Democrats as their party goes up against the party of no? And a quick comment after Senator-elect Brown's win, an important reminder to his Tea Party friends. My God, he's still talking. Senator-elect Brown is still giving his victory speech tonight in Boston. Howard Feynman will help me wrap it up, if he wraps it up, in a moment. First, the second of tonight's quick comments. The teabaggers have elected their first guy tonight, and thus they will be expecting legislation by tomorrow, making it a death penalty offense to call them teabaggers. It is thus useful to remind them anew how the term originated and with whom. A TV news report aired last March 14th in which a correspondent described the original protest act. Quote, take a tea bag, put it in an envelope, and mail it to the White House. Adding, ReTeaParty.com has a headline, Teabag the Fools in D.C. on Tax Day. Thus, the verb to teabag was invented by the teabaggers themselves. And the correspondent who put it on TV was one Griff Jenkins of Fox News. Send your complaints to him. A new kind of change you can believe in, or just a politician who keeps talking and talking and talking, like Bill Clinton kind of talking. Let's turn once again to wrap this up with our own Howard Feynman, senior Washington correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Howard, good evening.
Well, at least in this respect, Keith, this guy is really ready for the Senate, you know. Well, matter of fact, he can fit right into the filibuster strategy.
I was just going to say, is this what he's been elected for? As the 41st vote, he has to give the filibuster?
Well, they don't actually do them anymore, as you know, but if they go back to the old style
Does he
with
know
the
that?
cots, with the cots and everything else, he's perfect. He's perfect.
The spin on the meaning of this is far more deafening than I thought, and I brought earplugs for it.
Yeah.
What does this mean?
Well, I think whatever the truth on the ground in Massachusetts was about Martha Coakley and the various campaigns and who gave money and who didn't and all that other who shot John, the fact is this is going to have an effect on health care and on the Obama agenda because it's going to make the Republicans even more recalcitrant than they've already been. Now they believe that the country's on their side, which is not really true, and they're going to make life more complicated, and Obama's going to be operating in a less friendly terrain, both in terms of his own party, which is scared, and in terms of the media, which judges everything based on success or failure, not substance. So the fact you've had New Jersey and Virginia, now Massachusetts, 3 points make a trend. You're going to see a lot of stories about the failure of Obama's mandate a year after his inauguration. You can just see all those stories. So he's got a tougher environment to operate in for sure.
If it had been said the night before the 2008 election that as 2010 began, the Democrats would have a 59 to 41 margin in the Senate, wouldn't the damnedest of damned liberals have been doing cartwheels?
Yeah, I think the 60 thing just kind of mesmerized them in a way, and they went to that as the answer to everything. You know, you can, in theory, you should be able to govern with majorities of this size in the House and the Senate. You should be able to. You should be able to somehow lure some Republicans, entrap them into supporting you on things, or force them into voting for you on things. You break this humongous health care bill down into pieces, have separate votes on pre-existing condition, on covering the uninsured, all that kind of thing. I dare say there are a lot of Republicans who wouldn't be able to vote against the individual pieces of it. But somehow the politics of trying to do the whole big thing at once became amplified by the 60 votes, which ended up not helping the Democrats or Obama, but actually hurting them.
Is there an analogy to be made here between how the Democratic Party in Washington viewed what they had and the cliched story of everybody who's ever won $63 million in a lottery and spent it all in an hour and a half, or turned into these, extraordinary misers who could not spend any of it at any point? Is there something to that? Is that what we saw in the last year?
I actually think it's more the latter, in the sense that Obama took all of his winnings and turned them over to Max Baucus. I mean, to shorthand it a little bit. Turned it over to the Senate Finance Committee, where they took months coming up with a two-headed horse that is what the health care bill is, neither satisfying to the progressives on the left of the party, the Arianna Huffingtons of the world, or the conservative Democrats in the party. So paradoxically, they get these big votes, they force a 60-vote majority, but it's on something that nobody really is for.
Now, there could be some, maybe it's underconfidence. I think it's just another strain of overconfidence that was seen in the last year. But is what we're seeing in the other part of the screen here, does this have the potential to be Republican overconfidence or Tea Party overconfidence? Or do those folks actually know where they stand, as opposed to the way they tell everybody they think they stand?
Well, this is important. There's no question about it. And having gone to the Tea Party events and know my history of the Republican Party, this is the motive force in the Republican Party. There are problems politically with health care. There are problems politically with Obama seeming to overreach and yet not delivering at the same time. But if anybody can overplay their hand, it'll be the Republicans, because they may not realize that people just don't want somebody shouting no. That what the American people are upset with about the way Washington is still working or not working is that there's no cooperation, there's no results, there's no sense of goodwill and community. And I think ultimately that's what the fair-minded independent voters, which tonight went with Scott Brown, want out of the Republicans too. So there's every reason to think that they might overplay their hand, but this is a big night for them tonight, because this is now the center of gravity of the Republican Party.
Howard Fineman of Newsweek and MSNBC, thank you for your insight at 8 o'clock, and thank you for your insight here.
Okay, thank you,
Have a good
Keith.
night.
You too.
And that is Countdown for this, the 2,455th day since the previous president declared mission accomplished in Iraq. In New York, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck. And now to continue our coverage of the Massachusetts special election, once again to Boston. And here is Rachel Maddow. Good evening again, Rachel.
Good evening again, Keith. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for holding down the fort for us all in New York. Really appreciate it.
Of course.
And thank you at home for staying with us for the next hour. Some of the more remarkable things reported this evening as Republican Scott Brown defeats Democrat Martha Coakley in a special election for the United States Senate seat held until August by the late Edward Kennedy. One, the Republican supporters of Scott Brown shouting President Obama's campaign slogan of "Yes, we can." Two, they followed it by shouting John Kerry's next. Three, the campaign of the Democratic candidate and national Democratic officials sniping at each other in a vicious, overt blame game well before polls even closed. And four, Scott Brown, in his victory speech, going into great, weird, lengthy detail on what he described as the availability of his daughters.
And just in case anybody who's watching throughout the country, yes, they're both available. No. kidding, only kidding. I can see I'm going to get in trouble when I get home. The first thing I said, would you like me to drive the truck down to Washington so you can see it? And then I said, Mr. President, I know you like basketball, so tell you what, why don't you pick your best player and I'll take Ayler and we'll take you on 2-on-2. Fortunately, he had a good sense of humor.
The ultimate result tonight, not a landslide, but not close. With 99% of precincts reporting Republican Scott Brown with 52% of the votes to 47% for Martha Coakley. This in a state where Barack Obama beat John McCain by 26 points. Democrats in the state and nationwide both acting in this contest as if the real race was in the primary and the general was going to be a gimme. It most certainly was not. Joining us now from Republican State Senator Scott Brown's headquarters is MSNBC's chief Washington correspondent, Norah O'Donnell. Norah, set the scene for us there.
That he was a Republican, and you have to acknowledge that this was a very compressed election schedule because Scott Brown in many ways came out of nowhere, and the Coakley campaign did not do a good job of defining the issues early on. Scott Brown, the senator-elect, said tonight, the independent majority has delivered a great victory. He also said, this is the people's seat, and that's what caused this crowd to erupt. He also said, we can do better. And I think that's a message, a winning message, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. We can do better that may resonate. And I say that based on what Chuck reported tonight, the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll. There is a sense of dissatisfaction in this country with people in Washington, and Scott Brown managed to ride that wave. Another interesting thing, you pointed out some of the odd things, talking about the availability of his two attractive daughters and also being willing to take his truck down to show it to the president and play basketball against him. But there was one part of the speech that I don't know if you heard. He said, our tax dollars should not be spent on weapons to stop them and not lawyers. Let me start that over. Talking about terrorists, he said, our tax dollars should be spent on weapons to stop them, not on lawyers to defend them. Scott Brown defends waterboarding. He did during this campaign. I don't know how many voters or people know that, but that was part of the issues, and one of the issues in this campaign that really didn't get played out that much. And one of the reasons is because during a critical 3-week period between December 19th and January 5th, Martha Coakley was not on the air. As one Democratic official said, she literally went on vacation. So there were a number of issues that probably did not get a lot of play. Rachel?
MSNBC's chief Washington correspondent, Norah O'Donnell. Thanks very much for your reporting tonight. Really appreciate having you there for us. Of course, with the autopsies already starting on the Democratic campaign here, the issues that Norah raised are not alone. The question not only of what the momentum was on the side of the Martha Coakley campaign, whether or not the candidate herself was fully engaged in trying to win this general election campaign, but also the issue of whether or not the campaign even tried to define their Republican opponent. Scott Brown, as everybody has said tonight, did a masterful job of defining himself. Everything looks masterful when you win. But the question is whether or not there were great opportunities that were lost by the Democrats in not having early on taken Scott Brown seriously as a challenger and taken up the things in his record and the things in his policy positions that might even today still shock Massachusetts voters if they fully grokked what he was really about. He's, again, this is a state in which Barack Obama beat John McCain by 26 points. Scott Brown well to the right of John McCain in many of his policy positions. Joining us now is Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida. The Congresswoman is also the Vice Chair of the Democratic National Committee. Debbie, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Great
it's good
to be
have
with you, Rachel. Thanks.
As Vice Chair of the DNC, Democrats and liberals all over the country want to hear you say right now that the Democratic Party did do something wrong to lose this race, that you know what it is, and that you know how to fix it. Are you going to make those folks happy tonight?
Well, I can't wave a magic wand, which, believe me, if I could, I would do in a heartbeat. But I will tell you that it's very clear. It's been clear to me every time I've run a race that you can't treat a primary victory as your general election. And that was, I think, problem number one on the political side of things here. I don't think we should be doing too much finger pointing, but it is clear that this campaign treated the primary as the victory when there was still, a whole nother race to go. That having been said, I think it's time for a little bit of introspection and self-reflection when it comes to the priorities that we have and the ordering of those priorities. We've got to get health care reform done. We are talking about a state in Massachusetts that 98% of the people in that state have health care, so it wasn't really a priority for them. That's why this race wasn't about health care. But when I go home, and when every one of the colleagues that I speak to, particularly our most vulnerable members, go home, it's jobs and the economy and their frustration with the banking system and the fact that even though we've given them so much money, they still aren't lending that money, and the fact that you have people who are struggling to remain in their homes and who can't get their banks to work out their mortgages so that they can remain in their homes and not be foreclosed on. Those are the kinds of populist, average, everyday issues that people are struggling with that we need to make sure we have that we make a priority. And if we do that, then this bump in the road, which I'd rather have happen in January of the election year than in November, will be a lesson for us.
I think as Democrats are trying to figure out if this is in fact a bump in the road or they've just started driving down a very long, very bumpy road, the issue of lessons learned here, I think, is paramount. When you describe the campaign as having treated the primary as if that was the most important part of this race, that the general was maybe going to be a layup, that it didn't need to be worked for, is the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee also part of that problem? Were there national resources not directed to Massachusetts that should have been, that could have been? Are there lessons to be learned for the Democratic Party nationally heading into this election year in terms of not being too complacent?
Well, if you look at our track record, I mean, I can only speak for the DCCC because I'm a vice chair of the DCCC, and we have had 5 special elections, all of which we've won, including New York 23 and a number of other races that you never would have predicted Democrats would win. So we've got a pretty good track record when it comes to special elections. Some of this loss, and I think quite a bit of the loss, can be attributed to the campaign. The buck stops with the candidate at the end of the day. I don't know enough about the inner workings of the DSCC to suggest that they made serious mistakes here, but I can tell you that this should not be read as an indicator of things to come when it comes to the election in November, because you look at race by race, our incumbent members, they are ahead in the polls, ahead in the fundraising. They have been reaching out and focusing on the issues that matter in their individual districts. And as a party, we need to take a look not just at our agenda on the issues that I just mentioned, but we also are going to need to be very focused on motivating our base. Because the reason that this race was lost at the end of the day is that the Republican electorate was a lot more excited about getting out and voting for Scott Brown than they were about Martha Coakley. And we've got to examine carefully the reasons for that. We've got to be able to motivate our base and get them fired up about voting for their incumbent House members and electing some more Democratic members to the House and the Senate in November.
To that point, one of the things that I found remarkable just in the way the timing unfolded tonight is when Democrats started blaming each other, and sometimes in quite vicious terms. It's one thing for you and I to be gaming this out and talking about where improvements could have been made and who should be blamed or who shouldn't be blamed after this has already been decided. That was happening in a very public way in blistering terms well before the polls closed tonight. To me, that felt like Democratic political malpractice. Just this explosion of party indiscipline. And it makes me wonder why Governor Tim Kaine is not more out front tonight, why we're not hearing more from the White House tonight, why we're looking for Democratic anonymous sources tonight in a lot of cases rather than talking to somebody who's out there unifying the party.
Well, I don't think we're doing anything other than being human. You've got some folks who I think are licking their wounds here and are really going through some self-flagellation, for lack of a better term. Tomorrow, we're going to take a hard look at what the results of this election meant beyond just the malpractice that I think the campaign itself engaged in. Focus on those issues. We're not going to be a firing squad among ourselves. We're going to hunker down, focus on the issues like jobs and the economy, like making sure that we hold the banking system accountable. President Obama has pushed forward with a plan to expand the regulation of the banking system and the financial services system so that we can make it responsive to consumers instead of to the people who want to make money off the system. And when we focus on those needs, on those basic grassroots needs of people who are just trying to remain in their homes and make sure they can put food on their table and have a job, that they can go to work every single day and earn a paycheck, then in addition to passing health care reform so we can cover everyone and stop having a health care system designed to benefit the insurance companies rather than the patients, then I think that will be an agenda that we can really run on, and all of our candidates and incumbents will be able to be successful, and we'll be able to motivate our base. That's going to be incredibly important.
Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz of Florida doing yeoman's labor tonight out talking about Democratic Party strategy in the wake of such a difficult defeat for Democrats, both symbolically and in terms of numbers. Really appreciate your taking the time.
Thanks.
You get to be the optimist.
That's me. I'm a
good luck
half full
with
kind of person. Take care.
That makes one of us. Thank you, Congresswoman. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right, so after months and months and months and months and months of vicious partisan battling, does Scott Brown's victory and his potentially bill-killing 41st vote in the Senate mean the end of health reform? Ezra Klein is an expert on such matters. He's with the Washington Post. He joins us for that. I'm live from Doyle's Cafe with a very, very, very friendly, well-behaved crowd trying both to drink and enjoy themselves and sort of participate in all of this. Here in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, we are live from Boston. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're live in Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts, covering the United States Senate special election here. A Democratic aide said this to NBC News of tonight's shocking result in the Massachusetts special election. Paraphrasing here, if this had been written into an episode of The West Wing, nobody would have believed it. An unheard of Republican taking the seat of a beloved deceased party patriarch in a monumental upset, and that ends up killing his signature issue, the one that was to be his legacy? Too absurd. Comment tonight from a Democratic aide speaking to NBC News. It may be absurd. Question of whether it will kill health reform, though. This result tonight, will it kill health reform? As far as I'm concerned, it remains to be seen. It only kills health reform if Democratic hopes for health reform completely depended on having 60 votes. I'm not sure that's true. Ezra Klein knows a lot more about these issues than I do. He's with the Washington Post. He joins us next to get down to the nitty-gritty. We'll be right back. Now that the Massachusetts special election is over, what do tonight's results mean for health reform? Well, according to Virginia Democratic Senator Jim Webb, he thinks it means a timeout. Responding to Senator-elect Scott Brown's victory, Senator Webb released the following statement, quote, I believe it would only be fair and prudent that we suspend further votes on health care legislation until Senator-elect Brown is seated. And more news. Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts releasing this lengthy statement, and I'm going to read it at length because I think this is news here. This is Barney Frank's reaction to tonight's results. Quote, I have two reactions to the election in Massachusetts. One, I am disappointed. Two, I feel strongly that the Democratic majority in Congress must respect the process and make no effort to bypass the electoral results. If Martha Coakley had won, I believe we could have worked out a reasonable compromise between the House and Senate health care bills. But since Scott Brown has won and the Republicans now have 41 votes in the Senate, that approach is no longer appropriate. I am hopeful that some Republican senators will be willing to discuss a revised version of health care reform. because I do not think that the country would be well served by the healthcare status quo, but our respect for democratic procedures must rule out any effort to pass a healthcare bill as if the Massachusetts election hadn't happened. Going forward, I hope there will be a serious effort to change the Senate rule, which means that 59 votes are not enough to pass major legislation, but those are the rules by which the healthcare bill was considered, and it would be wrong to change them in the middle of this process. Again, that statement tonight from Barney Frank, Democratic Congressman Barney Frank of Massachusetts. Joining us now is the Washington Post's Ezra Klein. Ezra, thanks very much for joining us on the show tonight. Really appreciate it.
How are you, Rachel?
How do you feel to hear Barney Frank say that he hopes that Republican senators will now be willing to discuss a revised version of health reform?
I'm surprised to hear Frank saying that, particularly as Pelosi and Hoyer earlier today and over the weekend are both sort of saying there will be health care reform one way or the other. Look, that sounds like very bad news to me for the Democrats, but I think one thing that should be made clear here on Frank's statement, he's sort of implying here that the only way to pass health care reform is to go back to the Senate. That simply is not true. Health care reform is passed the Senate. The House could pass the bill, and the president could sign it without it ever going back to the Senate. That would not be some sort of violation of the rules, just one way you pass a bill.
Now, that said, lots and lots and lots of House members, including Congressman Anthony Weiner speaking today, said that they wouldn't vote for the Senate bill and that they're not sure that it could pass the House. You'll recall that it was passed by a pretty narrow margin in the House in the first place. I think you'd be peeling off both anti-abortion conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats unhappy with a lot of the measures in the Senate bill if you tried to do that.
If the liberals are bolting, then it would be nearly impossible. I mean, what people will say is that what you could do is most of these compromises, particularly on the things that liberals care about, the subsidies and the excise tax, could go right through the reconciliation process, which is certainly the way the White House favors going. But again, it depends on their willingness to do it. One of the lines you're hearing today is what Democrats really have to fear here is fear itself. If they decide that the result of this election is that they cannot pass health care reform, that they need to stop trying, then that's the end of health care reform. But there is nothing intrinsic to Brown taking his seat in the Senate that means this process is over. This is in the hands of the Democratic majority, and it'll be fascinating to see, what they decide. I think it's very hard to understand why they would prefer to go into 2010 having wasted a year of the country's time and with nothing to show for it, but they may make that decision yet.
It seems to me, and I articulated this with some enthusiasm earlier in the evening, talking with Chris Matthews and Keith Olbermann, that there's an exclamation point for Democrats on tonight's result, and that is that health care must pass, that health care must be passed, that they have no option on health care, that if this election has taught them anything, it's taught them that they've got to actually accomplish something in Washington and not let the Republicans take over, because the Republicans would love to and are poised to do so. I really think in political terms, unless the Democrats want to commit suicide, they're going to have to pass something. They're going to have to pass something that doesn't depend on chasing 60 votes. Now, Howard Dean suggested earlier on the show that maybe this health reform should just be simplified into a Medicare expansion, and that could be passed in a 51 votes in a reconciliation proposal. What do you think about that?
I highly doubt that you're going to get a reconciliation proposal, particularly for something as controversial as out to the Senate right now. But on the political side of this, I agree with you. One thing that I think people should be very clear on, there's no walking away from this bill. Democrats own it. Both chambers of Congress, House and Senate, have voted for it, have passed it. If this goes down, if it fails, all Democrats have in 2010 is a failure. If it wins, if they still manage to pass it, they do get a day of headlines saying, that all have historic there in the headline, and they do get to go into 2010 with something that they can sell as a true accomplishment. I can't understand how anyone on the Democratic side of the aisle would see the politics differently than that. But one thing that you do get a sense of talking from them, and I'm not very sympathetic to it, but it's there, is just exhaustion. This is giving a lot of people an excuse to give up, and frankly, they're tired of trying. They're tired of angry town halls. They're tired of angry constituents. They're tired of fighting with Republicans and going on Sunday shows and compromising away things they cared about. And they just don't want to do it anymore. Do I think that's more important than saving the lives and the homes of the uninsured? Not really, but Congress is a strange place sometimes.
Congress is a strange place. If that's the case, if that's what's holding them back, Congress is a very strange place for people running as leaders if they're too tired to press forward with what they said they would lead on. Washington Post's Ezra Klein doing some of the most concrete, helpful, expository work in terms of the process on health reform. Really appreciate your work, Ezra, and you for joining us tonight. Thanks.
Thank you.
Coming up next, so how is the Obama administration responding to this loss? For that, we'll talk with NBC's political director and chief White House correspondent, Chuck Todd. Right now, we are live at Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain. Stay with us.
if you're willing to get out the vote for Martha Coakley, then you won't just win this election, you will carry on the best progressive, forward-looking values of this proud Commonwealth and send a leader to Washington who is going to work tirelessly every single day to turn this economy around, to move this country forward, and to keep the American dream alive in our time and for all time. That's what Martha Coakley's about, and we need you. We need you on Tuesday. Thank you very much, Boston.
President Obama stumping just this weekend for the Democratic candidate in Massachusetts' special election for the United States Senate seat previously held by Ted Kennedy. He was here on Sunday night stumping for Martha Coakley. Martha Coakley, of course, was beaten by 5 points tonight by the Republican in the race, Scott Brown. Joining us now for more on what tonight's results mean for the White House and what the White House is saying about tonight's results is NBC News political director and NBC News chief White House correspondent and co-host of the Daily Rundown on MSNBC, Chuck Todd. Chuck, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You got it, Rachel.
So the official response from the White House tonight, of course, a congratulatory call from the president to Republican Scott Brown. What's the unofficial response?
Well, the unofficial response is going to be tomorrow. You're going to hear, first of all, you're going to hear from the president at some point. He's doing an interview with another network where they want to try to at least, what one aide said to me, lance the boil. You know, deal with this a little bit of a firestorm that's coming from Democrats. You've pointed to it. You know, the circular firing squad began before polls even closed, which seemed a little unseemly. But there's certainly a lot of angst and anger inside the White House at Martha Coakley because they do believe this. A good campaign should have been able to eke out a victory in a mediocre to bad environment. And that is true when it comes to Massachusetts. The fact is, you had a combination of a bad campaign and a bad environment, making it an unwinnable situation now in hindsight. So the problem that the White House is going to be dealing with is that how scared are congressional Democrats going to be? You know, you've put up some statements. They're fascinating statements from the Jim Webbs of the world, coming from a swing state like Virginia, Barney Franks of the world, an institutionalist, but coming from a very safe Democratic seat, all seem to be indicating that, you know, they want to play it safe a little bit, that there's a little bit of nervousness in congressional Democrats. The blind quotes tomorrow in the media is going to be fascinating to watch coming from Democrats. I can tell you this, the White House believes that they have to push and they have to do what you and Ezra were talking about, which is pass some form of health care. The worst result, the worst reaction to tonight in their minds would be not doing anything because they believe failure would make it even worse in November.
On that issue of what to do with health care, it seems like there will be some competing instincts among Democrats, and they're familiar ones. Democrats do this on a lot of things. There's the instinct to just push the clutch all the way in and let this thing just roll to a halt and hope nobody noticed that it was driving any direction before you did that. The other instinct, of course, articulated on our air tonight by Howard Dean, said this is the time to hit the gas if you don't want to be thought of as failures in Washington. Who represents who are the biggest, most important, influential Democrats representing those two instincts in the party right now?
Well, I'd say this. I mean, I think watching Evan Bayh's reaction in Indiana is going to be fascinating, and it's going to be a little nerve-wracking to the White House. Why? Evan Bayh is a moderate Democrat, conservative Democrat, who has been there for the White House on all of these votes, but he's up in 2010. He didn't have a real opponent. I think after tonight he will. I mean, one thing about the Scott Brown victory, it's going to make Republican recruiting in places like Indiana, Wisconsin, watch out Russ Feingold, Washington State, watch out Patty Murray. You could see more interest by Republicans in trying to challenge a Barbara Boxer in California, all of that. So watching Evan Bayh's reaction, and he already sort of had an early reaction when he said, hey, if they don't see this as a wake-up call, then I don't know what you would describe as a wake-up call. But how he reacts, would he be willing to be there for another vote? That's important. And then you look at sort of where I think where the progressive wing of the party is. And so right now you have a very defiant, for instance, Anthony Weiner, the New York City congressman, the Brooklyn congressman, who seems to think, and some others, even Stephen Lynch from Massachusetts, saying, hey, I'm not going to pass that Senate bill in the House. I'd rather have nothing. I think that's the initial 24-hour anger. The White House is hoping that will subside and that the House Democrats will sort of say, you know what, let's go the easiest political path, pass this Senate bill exactly as is, get the president to sign it, and then when people have problems with it, we can fix it as we go.
In terms of that wing of the party, though, which you're suggesting we should be watching Evan Bayh for clues on, but represented tonight, sort of remarkably, by Jim Webb and Barney Frank, which is an odd couple in politics if ever there was one, even if they are in the same party. This idea to sort of not push, to not try to push something through, particularly on health care, to not try to do something that's going to try to proceed in different rules than they were proceeding before this election. What's their overt agenda, though? If you're Jim Webb, or let's say you're Evan Bayh, and you're thinking that this isn't the time to push forward with health care, maybe this is the time to let it go. How do you come up with a cogent plan for Democrats to hold on to their majorities and not get creamed in November if your agenda is to not have legislative goals?
Well, look, when you're Jim Webb, you view yourself as a populist. So he's watching what's happening tonight and sitting there going, hey, how did the Democratic Party, which did so well sort of channeling their inner populace in 06 and 08, lose it all of a sudden in 10? And frankly, I've heard this same sort of lament out of White House staffers, right? They'll sit here and individually talk about going, yeah, you know what, the president's really got to get out there and connect with this sort of populist independent, angry independent out there who they sort of believe that they connect with, or they did connect with. They've lost touch with them. And so this populist wing of the Democratic Party, which is progressive on some issues, but also believes you've got to understand and feel and let these angry voters know you get it. You hear them. I think that's where Frank and Webb are coming from. Barney Frank has also sort of got a populist streak in him. A lot of those successful Massachusetts politicians, something Martha Coakley is learning, has a little bit of that populist streak in him. And I think that that's what they're hoping the White House takes away from this tonight. Because, look, these independents, they were change agents. They were angry in 06 and voted Democrats, angry in 08, or I should say voted to fire Republicans, and they're still angry. They don't see Washington changing enough in some ways. And I think that's what the message Webb and Frank are trying to send is, hey, Mr. President, make sure you publicly listen to this angry independent that's out there.
NBC News political director, chief White House correspondent, and the host of MSNBC's Daily Rundown every morning at 9 Eastern, Chuck Todd, also known as the busiest man in the business. Chuck and Savannah Guthrie have both White House Press Secretary Robert Gibbs and senior White House advisor David Axelrod appearing together on tomorrow morning's show. I understand along with Senate Minority Leader Senator Mitch McConnell, 9 a.m. Eastern tomorrow on MSNBC. Chuck, I know you won't sleep between now and then, so have a good night.
You got it. I will. Thanks.
Had Martha Coakley won tonight, she would have been the first woman senator elected from Massachusetts ever. Her best hope for winning, we heard from her campaign, was winning female independence. I'm betting that electoral forensics will show that that did not happen. Salon's Joan Walsh and I will talk about what tonight's Coakley loss means for and about women voters. That's next. I'm live from Jamaica Plain. Please stay with us. You know, Massachusetts has never elected a woman governor or a woman senator. Before electing Martha Coakley as state attorney general, which is the job she still has now and will be returning to now that she's lost the Senate race, Massachusetts, before Martha Coakley, had never selected a woman to be attorney general either. Massachusetts has a reputation of being a bastion of liberalism. As a person who's lived in Massachusetts for 12 years, I can tell you the state's not all that liberal. It's also a state that's elected four of the last five governors four of its last five elected governors have been Republican governors. There are some misnomers and some stereotypes about Massachusetts and national politics. And one of the things that often gets overlooked is how poorly women have fared in this state. Speaking of elected women, though, I should also bring you a little bit of new news that we just got a statement, naturally via Facebook, from the woman who came in second in the race for vice president in the last election. Sarah Palin has put out a statement on her Facebook page saying, in part, congratulations to the new senator-elect from Massachusetts. Scott Brown's victory proves that the desire for real solutions transcends notions of blue state and red state. Skipping ahead, clearly this victory is a bellwether for the big election night 10 months from now. In the spirit of bipartisanship, let me, again, this is Sarah Palin, let me offer some advice to the Democrats on how to stem this populist tide. Scrap your current health care bill and start from scratch. So every time you hear a well-meaning Democrat or analyst suggest that, keep in mind, that's Sarah Palin's idea too. Joining us now is Joan Walsh, editor-in-chief of Salon.com. Joan, thanks very much for coming in to be on the show tonight. Really appreciate your time.
Happy to be here, Rachel.
Isn't it interesting that basically none of the coverage of the Coakley-Brown race was about Massachusetts' dire record of never electing women to big statewide offices?
I think it was interesting, and I know that feminists were really thrilled when Martha Coakley won the primary. It was a big victory. We had high hopes for her. But, you know, the thing tonight, I have to say, as a feminist, is when we run bad campaigns, we need to take our lumps. We need to put on our grown-up pants and say so. So it would be very hard for me to sit here and say that sexism was a major factor in her loss. I don't think it was a major factor. It's always there. But I think the real issue is that she ran a poor campaign. I mean, you and I sat and we just watched Scott Brown go on and on and on and embarrass himself, in my opinion, talking about his daughters and offering them up. I think there was plenty to talk about in Scott Brown's candidacy, and she never chose to do so. She never made him, this newcomer neophyte, an issue. And so that, to me, right now is much more relevant than her gender.
When we're looking right now at how the Democratic Party is going to sort of learn from this and take its lumps, I posed the question to Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the vice chair of the DNC, earlier this hour, asking sort of hopefully that she could tell us that what the Democratic Party had done wrong, that they knew it was wrong, and that they were going to fix it. Obviously, a lot of Democrats at the national level want this to be all Martha Coakley's fault. But are there national recriminations, too? Should the DSCC should have gotten involved here earlier? Should other people at least have recognized that they needed to fight for this general harder than they were planning to at the state level?
Well, absolutely. I think there was a complacency in the Democratic Party. Look, she's under fire for taking a vacation. I've called my staff back from vacation. I've been called back from vacation in crises, in times where a vacation just isn't really in the cards for me right now. So, you know, there was the capacity for somebody else to see this train wreck from a few miles ahead and say to her, step it up here, lady, and we're going to help you in these ways. I also do think it's not a referendum on President Obama. I think that's pretty ridiculous. But I do think that there is a wake-up call here, that the Democrats have been dithering on their message. They have delayed and not delivered health care reform, and that those larger issues of message and direction and who is going to fight for you hurt Martha Coakley as well. It was not entirely her fault.
In terms of appealing, though, to women voters, and obviously Massachusetts is dominated by independents. We've got about 11 or 12% enrolled or declared Republican supporters among the Republican Party supporters among voters. About a third of the electorate identifies as Democrat, and everybody else identifies as independent. The Coakley campaign saying until the bitter end that they were really hoping that independent women would come through for them. And I wonder if there is, it seems to me, sort of a real disconnect between efforts to target women and a real desire to downplay the politics of abortion in Democratic politics. Big differences between these two candidates on abortion rights. Big issues about abortion rights being protected within the health care reform packages being debated in Congress right now. Those issues, which could conceivably appeal to quite a lot of independent women, really left out of the discussion as Democrats have been afraid to campaign on that issue, I think, for some time.
Well, I think there's the abortion issue, but I also think the other thing that you see and that you saw in this election, unmarried women are the most loyal Democrats. There's a big gender gap between unmarried women and married women, and unmarried men. Unmarried women are more liberal than married women for lots of reasons. They're unorthodox. They may be more vulnerable. And I think she really did not make a good, kitchen table, bread and butter appeal to those women who feel vulnerable because of jobs, because of health care. She really didn't have the kind of economic populist campaign. And then on the abortion issue, it cuts both ways. I mean, clearly, I think that she didn't speak clearly enough on that issue of emergency workers being Catholic. That sounded bad even to pro-choice people. So she tripped up on a few issues, and then throw in Kurt Schilling and the Red Sox gaffes, and she was toast. And I, as a woman who loves baseball, I don't consider that a gender issue. She should have known better.
Well, the Kurt Schilling, I think I sort of believe her that she was joking about Kurt Schilling, because who could believe that that
she didn't know.
Anyway, I don't believe she didn't know. She said she was joking, and I just have to believe it. I mean, if you've lived anywhere within, 1,000 miles of Massachusetts, you know that about Kurt Schilling, and so I just can't believe she didn't know. But in any case, it came down to the pickup truck guy versus the woman who made the gaffe about baseball, and we ended up with very, very, very gendered terminology in terms of the way that people thought about this. But ultimately, we go through another election cycle with another woman in Massachusetts having a shot and not making it. I guess some reckoning here. Yeah, Joan Walsh, editor-in-chief of Salon.com. Thanks very much.
Someone will one of these days.
Somebody will. They better.
Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Joan. I really appreciate it. It's been conventional wisdom for a couple of weeks already that the Massachusetts special election is a harbinger for the November elections, which is true, unless it's totally not true. Next up, my colleague Chris Matthews will be here to fight with me viciously about that. Stay with us.
Spartacus.
Maybe this was the moment when it should have been clear that there was something wrong with the Democratic strategy to hold on to the Senate seat that had been Ted Kennedy's in Massachusetts for 47 years. This might have been the moment. After winning the Democratic primary, after a heartfelt endorsement from the late senator's widow, Vicki Kennedy, the weekend before the special election, Congressman Patrick Kennedy made a passionate case to supporters for why the people of Massachusetts should support Marcia Coakley. Marcia. He said it over and over and over again. Marcia Coakley. Her name is Martha. That was 36 hours before the polls opened. Uh-oh. My colleague Chris Matthews of Hardball joins us now to help make sense of what Scott Brown's election means for the nation. Chris, thank you for sticking around. It's good to have you.
So what did that tell you? That they weren't paying attention? Could it be that?
Is it a quality control issue on the campaign trail there?
They jumped out. There was a lot of them, but that was one,
Yeah.
And I thought it wasn't a great group effort. It wasn't. You know what? I'll tell you something. We're going to get to this over time. It came up in the Hillary campaign, and that is this. Women in the workplace have to have what's called a professional manner. More than men have a little more history in the workplace in certain workplaces, and they have a little more range in the way they present themselves. Women are expected to perform professionally. An attorney, a doctor, you want to see a game face to some extent, right? And now when they get into politics, you're expected to do a lot of grabbing and holding and baby kissing, and a lot of it sort of intimate exchanges with total strangers, and an availability for intimate exchanges, like come up to me, grab me, you know what I mean? And if you show any kind of guardedness or what you call in the workplace professionalism, you're cold.
Yeah.
So what we're finding out now is it's harder. Now this guy tonight, I found him charming. I have no depth control or measure of the guy. He could be I don't know how deep he is or how good he is or bad he is, but I found he had a certain style with his family and the way he presented himself tonight, which was easy to take. Let's put it that way. I think Martha Coakley is a professional prosecutor who has to go into court in life and death cases, guilt and evil cases, tough civil cases, big enemies, hugely powerful enemies. You better damn well not look loosey-goosey, too cash.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well,
so she's not, no, I think it's very hard. In the old days, you would be able to run a male candidate like a Tom Dewey. Tough prosecutors become governors. You know, there was a history.
Yeah.
Tough Cosset, hard-charging prosecutors. Spitzer, before he had his problem. Spitzer, great, that's what we want. A woman comes on hard-charging coldly professional. Well, where's the niceness?
Well, she comes.
So I think we're having a hard time with that.
As don't mess with me, but in appropriate terms. I mean, she prosecuted that incredibly high-profile nanny case in the late '90s as a county prosecutor. On the strength of that, became the Middlesex County District Attorney, first woman I believe ever elected to that job. Essentially walked into the Attorney General's seat. A woman had never held that seat before either. On the strength of her reputation as a prosecutor, and she was just a get-it-done, and still is, a get-it-done prosecutor, and a public service lifer. Absolutely.
Okay, that game face, can you take that game face into the political arena where you're expected to do the diners, to do the rooms like this, to work booth by booth, to have real emotional exchanges with total strangers? It's something that she couldn't work out, and it didn't happen. Well, now, this guy, on the other hand, he's an attorney, I guess, a small-time attorney. He adapts the apparatus of a regular guy, a truck. Yeah. Now, I'm seeing as the axe handle was, what's his name from Georgia, all those. Everybody's got in Africa, everybody's got a kerchief or a fly swatter. Everybody's got a shtick. His shtick's the truck.
George Allen shtick, right? With
it's
the truck, right? Yeah.
Everybody's got a shtick, Well, it worked, but it was there's more range potential there with men, I think, and we're going to have to see how this works out.
One thing I thought was interesting, though, for all the likability of Scott Brown, and I do think he projected a very likable air, particularly because he got carte blanche to do it, because there was no competing narrative at all from the Coakley campaign. He really got to define himself.
He did. That's the key thing.
He got to do that himself. But then you saw him give a speech tonight, and the guy is a good extemporaneous speaker. He's not good at giving speeches. He's not good at formally addressing a room. He's not good at doing that formal work of being a politician. And it's sort of, even as Martha Coakley did this sort of oddly cheerful concession, with, again, not that much emotion and sort of like a gritty cheerfulness to it, he stood up and reading from a teleprompter seemed like it was the first time he'd ever done it in his life. Just sort of felt like not really ready for prime time.
Yeah, and we also know another great political figure who's a great orator who needs a teleprompter. Yeah. You know that guy?
Yeah, you and me.
No, I'm talking about Barack Obama. He doesn't work well without a prompter. He works much better with one. That's his strength. He's like Reagan, that way.
Teleprompters are useful devices.
Anyway, I thought that was my little bicentennial moment there, but I'm trying to think through why Martha Coakley, who will go on and be a great prosecutor in this state, will have a hard time in this other kind of politics.
Well, we'll see. She might have learned some lessons here.
We'll see.
Chris Matthews, of course, the host of Hardball. We'll see you again at the top of the hour for a special live edition of Hardball.
Midnight.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. More on Scott Brown's victory here in Massachusetts from Doyle's Cafe in Jamaica Plain. Back in just a moment. With tonight's loss of the Senate seat for the Democratic Party, a seat that had been held by the late Ted Kennedy for 47 years from 1962 until this past August when he died of brain cancer, the Democrats in the United States Senate now go from holding one of the largest Senate majorities since the 1970s to holding one of the largest Senate majorities since the 1970s. They will be at 59. They will see what they can do with 59 in terms of their pursuit of health reform and their other legislative priorities. This is the Rachel Maddow Show here on MSNBC. A special live edition of Hardball with Chris Matthews starts right this very second.
It's what you do with what you got. The Democrats now got 59 Senate seats. Let's play Hardball. Good evening. I'm Chris Matthews at Doyle's Cafe in Boston, and this is a special midnight edition of Hardball. Leading up tonight, Massachusetts has a new senator tonight. Republican Scott Brown defeated Democrat Martha Coakley and put off the biggest political upset of our time. He'll take the seat long held by the late Ted Kennedy and promises to be an obstacle to the Democrats getting the 60 votes they need to pass national health care. This was a rare election where voters knew exactly what they were voting on, and they went with Scott Brown to kill health care reform. Tonight, in this special late-night edition of Hardball, we'll look at the big new realities. Who's in trouble? Which Democrats face the same fate as the Democrats in Massachusetts? And who's going to get blamed for tonight's defeat? The president, the candidate, the Democratic Party, the health care bill. Let's start with Nora O'Donnell, who's at Brown headquarters, and Kelly O'Donnell at Coakley headquarters. First, Nora O'Donnell.
And good evening to you, Chris, or maybe I should say good morning. And you know, about 3 hours after Martha Coakley called Scott Brown to concede this race, Scott Brown is still here. He's still working the room. He's still behind me shaking hands. And that may be part of why Scott Brown won this contest. They say that he worked very, very hard. He did not take any votes for granted, and he really worked it. This is also about an independent streak that is raging through this country. We saw it, of course, in Virginia and in New Jersey and now in Massachusetts. That's exactly what's erupt. And the idea that it's not Ted Kennedy's seat, but it is the people's seat. I can also report to you that Vicki Kennedy, the widow of the late Senator Ted Kennedy, was called by Scott Brown tonight. He said that he called her and that he hoped that he could do Ted Kennedy proud in this seat. I think it was a very nice touch, given that when Scott Brown praised Ted Kennedy, this crowd got silent. They did not boo and hiss like they did when we saw other Democrats. And so that was sort of a note here during this evening that was very partisan, because this campaign, when we actually had a Republican crowd shouting, "Yes, we can," and John Kerry's next in terms of taking him out. Vicki Kennedy was not here in Massachusetts tonight. I'm told she was at a long-planned function back in D.C., but clearly this has been a very difficult night for her, according to one aide, given that now her husband's late seat has gone Republican. It should be pointed out that the last time this seat was held by a Republican was in 1952, when Henry Cabot Lodge was defeated by JFK. This is a very storied seat, Chris, as you well know. JFK, Ted Kennedy, even John Quincy Adams once held this Senate seat. Now it's held by the Republican Scott Brown, who tonight joked that when he talked to the president, he said to him, "Do you want me to bring my truck down to D.C. and show it to you?" This has changed the national landscape. It may, in fact, imperil President Barack Obama's planned health care reform, because now Scott Brown is the 41st Republican senator. Everybody in this crowd was shouting tonight, 41-41. Chris?
Thank you, Nora Donna. Let's listen now to that moment you talked about in Scott Brown's acceptance speech tonight, where he paid tribute to the man he succeeds, Ted Kennedy, the late Senator Kennedy. Let's listen.
As you know, this special election came about because we lost someone very, very dear to Massachusetts and to America. Senator Ted Kennedy was a tireless worker and a big-hearted public servant, and for most of his lifetime was a force like no other in this state. The first call I made was to his wife, Vicki, and I told her that his name will always command the affection and respect by the people of Massachusetts, and I said we feel the same about her. There's no replacing a man like that, but tonight I honor the memory, and I pledge to be the very best and try to be a worthy successor to the late Senator Kennedy.
And here's some of what Attorney General Martha Coakley said tonight in her concession speech. Let's listen.
Anyone who's been out on the campaign trail, particularly in this race, has seen the anger of folks who are frustrated, concerned. They are angry about health care issues, and they're angry about our two wars, our inability to properly care for those who return home after fighting. I had hoped, in the best interests of our state and the country, to go to Washington to address these issues. I hope that as a nation and as a Commonwealth, we can do better in the future. You know that as your Attorney General, I will continue to fight and address them here with everybody in Massachusetts who cares about these issues. Thank you. So for me and for you, tonight this campaign comes to an end, but there's plenty of work to do here in Massachusetts and as we continue to organize for America. And so we will always remember our terrific Senator Ted Kennedy and his words. The work begins anew, the hope rises again, and the dream lives on. Thank you.
Wow, that's Martha Coakley, the Attorney General of Massachusetts, who lost a race, a real heartbreaker for her tonight here in Massachusetts. Let's go to Kelly O'Donnell, who was with the losing candidate tonight. You know, it must be a killer to have thought for weeks, even months, that you had the Senate seat, that you were going to be the next senator, perhaps for life, from Massachusetts, having won the Democratic primary, and then to have it taken away from you and just really over the holidays.
Well, Kristen, she would have been the first woman to be elected by the people of Massachusetts to serve in the U.S. Senate. They've never had a woman governor either. And I was in this same room back in December when she was the victor in the primary over some very formidable Democrats. She won by about 20 points. That was a joyous night for her. Tonight, the crowd was gone in a heartbeat. And political imagery is so powerful in victory and in defeat. So here we are with the guys on the forklifts and the guys putting away the chairs, and the room is empty, and it really tells you kind of the swiftness with which defeat takes hold and people's disappointment takes them right out the door. For Martha Coakley, it was tough. She acknowledged the anger of the public tonight. People said she didn't do enough of that during the campaign. She also, of course, spoke about Vicki Kennedy and the Kennedy family. We saw no members of the family here. As Nora mentioned, Vicki Kennedy was not in town. But we saw no other members of the family. And, Chris, you would remember that Martha Coakley was the very first person to announce her intention to run for this seat within about a week or so of Edward Kennedy's passing. And there were some members of the Kennedy family at that time that thought it was too soon. So there had been sort of a chilly relationship. And then, of course, they embraced her completely once she won the nomination, tried to help her out, especially in the last few days. But Martha Coakley said she was heartbroken. She also signaled what will be coming tomorrow. She said the Wednesday morning quarterbacks. So she's already heard it. Everyone is talking about who is at fault. She began her own defense, saying that she worked she had fierce passion about this, worked very hard. There will be those who disagree with that. And what was also striking is when, among her many thank yous that she extended, reminding everyone that President Obama had come here for her, and he was not in that very popular visit. There were lots of people in that auditorium. He was not able to help her convert this to a victory tonight. And that's one of the big takeaways. What will this mean for President Obama when a sure thing goes down in defeat like Martha Coakley has here? Chris?
Well, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat, we saw it both tonight. Thank you very much, Kelly O'Donnell. Thank you, Nora O'Donnell, for that capping of the evening tonight. A big night in American politics, all here in Massachusetts. Up next, the blame game. It already began among the Democrats before Martha Coakley had actually lost tonight, even before the polls were closed or the votes counted. So who will get the blame? President Obama, health care, or what? Maybe the Democratic Party. Republican Scott Brown's the winner in Massachusetts. We'll have much more from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. After this, you're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC, the place for politics.
You know, the funny thing is, they thought that you were all on board with all their ambitions. Yeah, they did. Yes, they did. They thought that they owned your vote. They thought that they couldn't lose. But tonight, you and you and you and you and you all set them straight. Thank you.
There will be plenty of Wednesday morning quarterbacking about what happened and what went right, what went wrong. And I know that everyone, including me, I am brutally honest on my own performances. We will be honest about the assessment of this race. And although I am very disappointed, I always respect the voters' choice.
Welcome back to Hardball from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. So who is to blame for Martha Coakley's incredible defeat tonight? No one expected this even a few weeks ago. Steve McMahon's a Democratic strategist, and Steve Kornacki's with a great newspaper, the New York Observer. Let's put up the most usual suspect using Oaken's razor here. How about the candidate, Martha Coakley? She mentioned Steve McMahon that she was ready to accept her end of the grief. Your thoughts on what kind of a candidate she was?
Well, I mean, I felt badly watching her tonight because obviously it pained her greatly. But if it's true that she took a vacation from December 19th until January 5th, she was a negligent candidate. And I can't speak to her performance on the stump because I wasn't there. But based on the reports that I heard from people who were there, she was not a particularly inspiring candidate. You said earlier that she was a gifted attorney, and I'm sure that she can make a case in a courtroom very effectively. We saw that in the case of the baby shake case that she prosecuted some time ago. But that is different than connecting with voters, and clearly there was some disconnect between Martha Coakley and the voters in Massachusetts. We can all try to figure out what it was, but I'm sure part of it was Martha Coakley.
Steve Kornacki, the candidate, judge her now, Wednesday morning. It is Wednesday morning.
Well, you know, the irony is if this campaign had been waged, let's say, 2 years ago in Massachusetts, when you still had George W. Bush in the White House, you still had the Republicans setting the agenda in Washington, Martha Coakley could have done everything she did that she's being faulted for right now, and some of it she deserves to be faulted for, and she would have won by 25 points. And everybody would be saying, she ran a fine campaign. My point is, what they found out in Massachusetts tonight is what I think is what I think.
One of the goals of a candidate is to first of all check the calendar, see what year you're running it, right, and then act accordingly. Is that something that she forgot or made a mistake?
Well, I think Democrats have to realize that it's not 1994 to 2008 anymore, because in blue states like Massachusetts, they had a recipe, a real simple recipe.
Okay, you are
against Gingrich,
you are the biggest
Bush.
Dodger. Did she run a lousy campaign or a good campaign?
She ran a lousy campaign.
Okay, let's move on. Next on our list of who to blame, health care. Was the burden of the president's health care program with all the potential costs on top of the Massachusetts health care plan, the fact that people already have a plan, retirees already have whether they like it or not, a socialized health system. Nobody wants to admit it. It's a government-financed health system, right? They don't need another one, they'll say. They already have a health care system in Massachusetts. Some people say, we got one, we don't want the added burden, we don't want to be a donor state. I've heard all these arguments.
Right.
Somebody shaking their hands. Fine. Majority rules. Okay, most people disagree with you.
We don't have the limits on pre-existing injuries.
Okay.
We don't have them cutting you off in case you're already...
Were these points made in the campaign? Were these points made?
Oh, I don't disagree with you.
Okay, thank you. They weren't made. Okay, your thoughts. Was the health care measure, Steve Kornacki, too big a measure? Because the reason I ask this is I've never heard of a candidate say, when I get into office, well, I won't use litmus tests, I'll think about the issue. No, I'll vote against health care. This guy has said premeditated, deliberate murder of the health care bid. He is going to kill it in its crib, and he says he'll do it, and people voted for him.
Vote against the national version of what he voted for in Massachusetts. Okay. Vote against the national version of what Mitt Romney implemented.
Did this bring him down? Bring her down?
I think so, because I think what you saw was that people rejected sausage making, because for the last year we've had a debate that to most voters is incomprehensible on health care.
They didn't see the benefits, they just saw the mess creating it. Steve McMahon, did health care become this sort of the yoke around the neck of this candidate, Martha Coakley?
The perception of health care reform that was presented apparently to Massachusetts voters certainly was something that was an overwhelming obstacle for Martha Coakley. Only 35% of the voters in Massachusetts favored health care reform. 44% of the voters in America today favor health care reform. So Massachusetts, the bluest of blue states, was running almost 10 points behind the country in terms of its support for health care reform. We can debate why that is and whether it's because the Massachusetts experiment failed or whether it was a great success, but a fact is a fact, and it was 10 points lower in Massachusetts in support than it was in the rest of the country. That was a problem. Martha Coakley apparently never explained, nor did anybody in Massachusetts, why health care reform is a good idea for people who have health insurance and who like the insurance that they have. That should have been done. It wasn't done. That's probably the fault of many and not the fault of one candidate.
Okay, let's go on to the president himself. The president himself. I looked at a New York Times article the other day that said that even among people who like President Obama, Scott Brown won. So what's that about? Should he be blamed, given that information? Steve McMahon.
Steve.
The president has a 60%. Yes, okay. Should he be blamed? No. The president has a 60% approval rating in Massachusetts. He went to Massachusetts to campaign for Martha Coakley. You know, a couple days ago, we were looking at polls that showed Martha Coakley down by as many as 9 points. She lost by 3 or 4, maybe 5. The president, I think, pulled her up. Did he pull her up enough? No. Has he pulled up health care reform enough? No. But it's not his fault. He did what he could do, and frankly, the campaign didn't deliver. The president can only get you so far in one of these things. His personal popularity is pretty significant and pretty impressive in Massachusetts today. It wasn't enough for Martha Coakley, and I don't think that's his fault.
Do you agree with that? You know, do you think he helped or hurt her, having the presidency of Barack Obama?
I don't think
because you said if the election were held a couple of years ago, before he was president, that she would have done better with the same candidacy.
Sure. Well, I mean, in the broad sense, when you have a president and you have the president's party controlling both houses of Congress by substantial majorities, and you have 10% unemployment, it's always going to be against the president. But in terms of his visit, I wish we would learn at some point that these visits from presidents, they never really matter. The only example I can think of in politics where a politician who's not on the ballot actually transferred his popularity to another candidate and pulled him over the finish line was Rudy Giuliani 6 weeks after 9/11 with Michael Bloomberg. Truly extraordinary circumstances. Yeah. I mean, I can think of so many other examples where they bring him in. You know, Barack Obama just went to John Corzine in New Jersey, and it was going to, it never actually works. You know, voters separate the two, and that's what you're seeing in that poll.
Okay, what about the Steve McMahon? What about the party, the Democratic Party? And I mean by that the apparatus, the National Committee, the Senate Campaign Committee, the people that work nationally for the Democratic Party. Did they come in and help Martha Coakley or not?
Well, you know, that's going to be the $64 question as we move forward. There's no question that Scott Brown crept up on Martha Coakley, and that everybody didn't see it. The National Party didn't see it. The Coakley campaign apparently didn't see it. They weren't aware of it at the White House. So, you know, who should have seen it and who saw it first is something that I guess the parlor game will settle over the next several days. I don't think the Democratic Party does anything in Massachusetts but help Democratic candidates. There's a 3-to-1 registration advantage in Massachusetts. Now, could the Democratic Party have done more earlier? Yes. If someone had seen this problem earlier, I'm sure the Democratic Party would have done so earlier. If the Coakley campaign would have brought a poll to the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee and said, we really need help right now, I'm sure they would have been there. But, you know, it was the Christmas holiday, and apparently Martha Coakley was on vacation in the Caribbean, and there wasn't a lot of work being done from what you read and what's been reported. So what could the party have done that they didn't do? I don't know, but I'm sure there will be a thorough investigation, as they say here in Washington, and some heads will probably roll.
For more of the blame game, check your local listings. It's going to start tomorrow morning. By the way, it'll be on the front page of every paper in Massachusetts and New York. Who blew it? Anyway, thank you, Steve McMahon, and thank you, Steve Kornacki. Great newspaper, New York Observer.
You got it.
Up next is the biggest political upset in memory, I think, and Republican Scott Brown's the senator-elect from Massachusetts. Final numbers with 100% reporting right now. Brown's got 52, Coakley's got 47. It clearly narrowed in the final hours. I mean, clearly. All the evidence suggests they came back together. She might have won in a couple more days. Who knows? President Obama's health care reform is likely dead as we know it. Perhaps. I'm not sure. I'm not sure of that. I think they can still win this thing if they get the House to buy the Senate version and then go to Reconstruction. There is a two-step here that can work. But more of that and more than thinking about it at Doyle's Cafe here in Boston. After that, you're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC.
Most of all, I will remember that while the honor is mine, this Senate seat belongs to no one person, no one political party. And as I said before, and you've heard it today and you'll hear it loud and clear, this is the people's seat. And one thing is clear. One thing is very, very clear as I travel throughout the state. People do not want the trillion-dollar health care plan that is being forced on the American people. And this bill is not being debated openly and fairly. It will raise taxes. It will raise taxes. It will hurt Medicare. It will destroy jobs and run our nation deeper into debt.
Welcome back to Hardball, live from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. So what is this Republican victory? by Scott Brown for the Senate in Massachusetts meeting for health care reform. Joining me right now is MSNBC political analyst Lawrence O'Donnell. Lawrence, if you were still back here advising these senators, how would you do it?
Oh, Chris, my advice was always confidential. Let me tell you, Chris, I don't see any way you go forward from here with health care. Now, I'm not saying they can't do it. I'm just saying I've run bills through the Senate in reconciliation. I've done them without reconciliation and that needed 60 vote thresholds to get over. I know every procedure that is available now. I don't know one that can work. Within the reconciliation procedure, what everyone always forgets is that every single day, usually several times a day, there are 60 vote thresholds that you have to clear. These are parliamentary procedural thresholds that get thrown inside the reconciliation process. And yes, you only need 51 at the end, and you don't need a cloture vote to get to that 51, but you have several procedural votes that require 60 several times during the process. So I don't see how they do it.
Well, let me ask you about a possibility. Suppose, and I know this is an extreme situation for those who want health care, for the House members, led by Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer, and the top committee chairs, to basically accept the fact, in this instance, they should accept the Senate version, live with it, let that become law, let the president sign the bill by basically passing an identical word-by-word, sentence-by-sentence bill, and then do so with a commitment from the president and from the senators, the leadership, that there'll be a reconciliation measure passed in the spring, which will deal with the problems they have with the bill. Is that possible?
Well, I tell you, if you made me that offer, I would never take it, because I would never take an offer in federal legislation that requires you to pass something else, to pass a follow-up bill. I've never seen that kind of thing work out. But I'm going by what I heard from Anthony Weiner today on this network, saying he doesn't think that the Senate bill can pass the House. I've talked to House members today, Chris, Democrats, who are the kind of people you need to have in line on this, and they're willing to be patient with Nancy Pelosi to see if she can pull out something other than the Senate bill. But I don't see where you would get the votes you needed to pass that Senate bill through the House right now. If they did it, it's absolutely true. That bill would go straight to the president's desk for a signature. But as of now, I don't see how they would do it. And also, all of the arguments that Republicans would use against it are arguments made by Democrats who would then be voting for it. Democrats have been in the House have been arguing eloquently and angrily against the Senate bill for weeks now. Richard Trumka said last week that it was a horrible bill, and without the compromises they made in the Roosevelt Room last week, Labor would be attacking the Senate bill. And so you would simply use the words of Labor and of House members who've already attacked the Senate bill, who would then, I guess, be standing on the Senate floor saying, now I'm willing to vote for the bill that I just attacked. It'd be a very, very ugly debate for the Democrats to go through on the House floor.
Can the Democrats face the voters this November in a midterm election without facing huge defeats if they can't point to a major success like health care?
Yes, they can, because there's so much that can happen between now and November. So many things that have nothing to do with what goes on in Washington, positive and negative. For example, Chris, one of the very big turning points in this election in Massachusetts was that underpants bomber on that plane over Detroit. That was a key issue in the debate that followed that event. And Martha Coakley, as an attorney general, was all for going through the court process. You know, the Miranda rights, everything that President Obama was in favor of on this prosecution, she was in favor of. Scott Brown was the opposite, and he really hammered home on that, and he started to move in the polls right after that, along with that great moment that David Gergen gave him. David Gergen served up the home run pitch of the campaign like nothing I've ever seen. That question about the Ted Kennedy seat, him calling it the people's seat. From that moment on, with his position on how to handle these terrorists on airplanes and his position on it's the people's seat, his numbers started to skyrocket. And so health care he'd been harping on all along. The things that changed after Christmas were those two things.
That was a gopher pitch worthy of the great Robin Roberts, wasn't it?
It was, and it was
over the plate. It floated high above the plate, right over the middle,
and it was
just to be whacked as hard as you could.
And that was the perfect answer for the independent voter. People talk about Massachusetts being a Democratic state. It's an independent state. That's the majority registration is independent. And Chris, in Massachusetts, when you register as an independent and you vote in a Democratic primary, they automatically enroll you in the Democratic rolls. You have to then unenroll to vote as an independent again. So it takes energy in Massachusetts, and it takes conscientiousness to be an independent, to say, I willfully do not want to be associated with the Democratic Party. There is a tremendous amount of pent-up resentment over the years about how the Democratic Party controlled things. Chris, I'm going to give you one more quick point before we go. Mayor Menino controlled enough votes in Boston to turn this election. Those votes did not show up today. The Boston turnout was very low. You had suburban calling banks phoning into the city to try to get the Menino vote out. Menino didn't like the outcome of the Democratic primary, Chris. The winner of the Democratic primary, Martha Coakley, had a lot of enemies in the establishment. She was absolutely opposed by the Kennedy family, by all of the Kennedy associates going into the election. This was not just what you saw out there in the campaign trail. There was a certain amount of an inside job going on here with the Democrats in Massachusetts. They want someone else in that seat in 2012. If Coakley got it now, she'd probably have it forever.
Well, I heard the other side of that argument from inside the mayor's office tonight that the number they gave us, we'll look at the numbers tomorrow, Lawrence, but the plurality coming out of the city could have been strong enough to stop this thing.
Absolutely.
I agree.
Absolutely.
It wasn't enough to give her a big victory, but it was enough to give her a fighting chance outside the city, and it was a big swamp out there for her.
Keep asking the mayor questions about it, Chris.
Okay. I have sources. Thank you, Lawrence O'Donnell. Up next, Scott Brown's victory tonight may be a signal of things to come in the midterms. How would you like to be a Democratic senator in a state that was already wobbly and watch tonight with your wife or your husband this particular thing? It's getting awful close. If Republicans can win in Massachusetts, can they win anywhere? That's what they're thinking tonight. And one other Democrats are on the endangered species list. We're going to give you some Democrats with wobbly knees when we come back. You're watching Hardball, only on MSNBC.
Throughout this race, we had the machine scared and scrambling, and for them, it's just the beginning of an election year filled with many, many surprises, I can tell you that. They will be challenged again and again across this great land, and when there's trouble in Massachusetts, rest assured, there's trouble everywhere, and they know it.
Welcome back to Harbaugh. So with Scott Brown's victory up here in Deep Blue, Massachusetts tonight, can Republicans win pretty much anywhere? And which Democratic senators out in the country are watching their backs tonight? We're joined by the Politico's Jonathan Martin and by Karen Tumblety of Time Magazine. Karen, welcome back. Let's take a look. So which of the other Democratic senators are on the endangered list? Let's take a look. Majority Leader Harry Reid out in Nevada. Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas. Pennsylvania's Arlen Specter, the new Democrat. Evan Bayh of Indiana, and Russ Feingold of Wisconsin. Karen, if you had to do a Time Magazine cover on endangered Democrats, is that the right order?
Yeah, I think especially Harry Reid and Blanche Lincoln. But, you know, to repeat what has happened here in Massachusetts, you need to have a number of things going. And one of those things is the kind of candidate that Scott Brown turned out to be. I mean, this was a very upbeat, sunny kind of candidate who somehow managed to ride a wave of a very angry electorate.
Okay, your thoughts, Jonathan?
No, I mean, absolutely.
Is this the perfect storm in Massachusetts? It's not a template for the year. It's not a GPS on how the Republicans can go from state to state and do what they did here?
Well, if you can run against health care and win in this state, then surely you can do it in a place like Indiana, which is much more of a conservative place, or a place like Nevada. And you can definitely do it in a place like Arkansas. I mean, Harry Reid obviously has had a problem for a year now. His numbers have been really down. But if you're Blanche Lincoln and you see the results tonight, my goodness, I mean, how do you run for re-election in Arkansas, voting for a health care bill and being a Democrat? It's going to be a very tough year for her. And here's a name to watch, Chris, in Indiana. Congressman Mike Pence. Is he now emboldened enough to get in and challenge Evan Bayh? Bayh has not had a first-tier opponent. This kind of result tonight could get a guy like Pence from the House into that Senate race.
Well, let me... it seems to me that the candidate tonight who won, Scott Brown, was very assertive about what he thought all this meant. Karen, he says eventually Barack Obama will find a way to raise taxes to pay for health care. He's asserted that. Barack Obama's talked about, with the latest concession to the labor unions and not going after the Cadillac plans, they are going to raise the price that you pay if you make over $200,000 a year for Medicare. But that's something that's sort of consistent with the president's plan about not going after people who are really middle class, but going after higher income people. Is that the kind of thing they can keep doing in other states? Say, healthcare means higher taxes, healthcare means big debt, healthcare means XXX.
Well, one thing, though, is that people in Massachusetts have health care. They have almost universal coverage. So what people here are very afraid of is increasing costs. They are afraid that Medicare is going to be hurt. But when you get to these other states, you have a very large percentage of people who don't have health care, who are worried about losing their jobs and losing their health care when they do. So I think in some ways the president can appeal to sort of the larger goals of health care in those states in maybe a way that he couldn't in Massachusetts.
Let's go to a perhaps trivial discussion of this option game that the Democrats have now. I want to get back to something. Given the fact they only have 59 seats now in the United States Senate, given the fact that tonight Jim Webb of Virginia, a new Democratic senator, said you cannot vote on health care or anything else significant till the new Democratic senator has his seat taken, that he's there and voting. Was there ever a chance, Karen Tumley, the Democrats would try to whiz through some House-Senate conference agreement on health care before the new Republican senator from Massachusetts got to vote? Was there ever a chance of doing that?
You know, I never bought that scenario, Chris, and here's why. I do not think that you can pass a bill that transforms 1/6 of the economy essentially on a technicality. That would have killed them in the midterms. So I think that was always pretty much of an idle threat. That was just idle Washington chatter.
Right. John, is that right? Was there ever a chance of whizzing us through and holding up the certification from the Secretary of State up here?
I mean, I think it was thought about for about 5 minutes, of course. But the political optics of doing that, look, you have a bad enough problem when you lose this state by 5 points very deeply in the state. And then you're going to compound your problem by seeming to really underscore everything that conservatives are saying about you, that you're basically, abusing your majority in Washington. Why would you want to do that politically? I think the more likely option now is they will try and get the House, Chris, to basically pass the Senate bill that's already passed.
That's really the only option left.
It seems like it.
Okay, thank you very much. Karen, do you think there's any chance the Senate bill would pass the House and then to deal with the compromise aspects of it later through some other reconciliation measure in the spring?
Right now, that is the best shot they've got, and it's not a very good one.
No, I agree with you completely. Almost a little more optimistic. I'd kick it up a little on the optimism side. But thank you very much, Karen Tumley of Time Magazine. Thank you very much, Jonathan McMahon of the great organization called Politico. I read it every morning. Up next, the Scott Brown's victory up here in Massachusetts tonight paved the way for bigger Republican victories around the country. Much more from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. It's Hardball, only at MSNBC, the place for politics.
If anyone doubts that in this next election season that's about to begin, well, let them take a look at what happened in Massachusetts. Because what happened here in Massachusetts can happen all over America.
Welcome back to Harbo Live from Doyle's Cafe in Boston. We're joined by the Politicos Ben Smith and David Paleologos of Suffolk University, the man who studies this. I want to ask you something to make the liberals feel good tonight. I think they need some elixir at this time of night. Maybe I do too. Let's go to this one. William Allen White, the great American editor from the Midwest 40, 50 years ago, maybe longer ago, said this about America. I want your reaction to it tonight. The most precious gift God has given to this land is not its riches of soil and forest and land, but the divine dissatisfaction planted deeply in the hearts of the American people. We do not say it's as good as it gets. We're always complaining. We love to complain. We love to change, throw the bums out, try again, put the pressure on them, put the wood to them, keep their feet to the fires. We got a million phrases for it. You're the pollster. Is that part of our gift? Because I thought for years we were stuck in the mud of just electing incumbents over and over again. Familiar ethnic group, the name sounds like my name, vote for the guy or the woman again and again and again. Don't think about it. Have we gotten away from that automatic re-election of incumbents?
We didn't have any incumbents in this.
We had an incumbent party.
Fight. We had an anti-establishment vote.
Yeah, okay.
But it would be a big mistake for Scott Brown to think that his votes were Scott Brown votes. I mean, there were a lot of other dynamics in play. Votes against Barack Obama, votes against Harry Reid, votes against Nancy Pelosi, votes against the tax, the corruption in Massachusetts, dovetailed with all of the key issues, namely the economy and health care. You add it all up and Scott Brown wins by 100,000 votes.
What was a rebellious vote? Is the state rebellious again like it was back in the beginning?
Oh, I think so.
Is this in a Thomas Paine mood up here now?
This is a state that would show equal favorability for John Kerry and Bill Weld. Almost identical fave-unfave numbers.
And then?
And the resulting impact is there is a rebellious attitude, and if the party in power
would the late Ted Kennedy have had a tough race in this situation? Same situation?
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Why not?
Because I think independence in some of the key areas would have swung to Kennedy.
Okay, your thoughts, Ben Smith.
Yeah, I mean,
are we in a period of rebelliousness we're going to see across the country that's just bipartisan, or not bipartisan, anti-incumbent, anti-establishment?
I mean, it sure looks like it. And I mean, I think it's a period that started with Barack Obama's election. I think kind of what he's realizing, what we're realizing is it's the same, that he's become kind of victim of the same thing that carried him to power.
Well, people vote for deliverance. You know what I mean? It's a biblical term. Deliverance. Deliver me from this unemployment rate I don't like. Deliver me from something that looks going to be really expensive and high taxing on me. Right? They want deliverance right now, right? Can anybody really deliver them or just give them more bitch time?
Well, people get impatient, and there's a short attention span. And if an administration's been in power a year,
okay, does that mean the Republican Party is smart to just say no, 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 no for the rest of the year to everything?
I think what they need to do is to determine whether or not the economy rebounds enough that they need to make that an issue or other issues.
I mean, if it doesn't rebound?
Well, if it doesn't rebound, correct.
But is saying no the smart Republican move?
Well, I think it is.
Because this guy just got elected by promising the one thing: I will vote to kill health care. I've never heard of a campaign based on one particular negative notion. I will kill this bill.
Well, stopping motion is motion. And resisting motion is motion if that's what the electorate chose. I mean, 51% of Massachusetts residents oppose.
Is this the Republican law of physics? First law of physics? Stopping motion is motion. Put that one down. There's a party label. I can't wait to be for the party that stops motion.
Amen. There you go.
Instead of let's just get this country moving again, Jack Kennedy said, let's get this country stopped again.
Well,
anyway, your thoughts, man. We're having fun here. It's late at night.
I mean, he's going to have to run for re-election in Massachusetts. He's going to have to say yes to something. I would think pretty fast. He's got to pick some big liberal initiative to say yes to, maybe climate change.
Really?
Not going to be health care.
You can't survive in Massachusetts as a relatively conservative senator, do you believe?
See, I don't think so. Do you think?
No, you don't think so. You don't think so, do you? Not if you're voting. Yeah, you're ready for this one, aren't you?
I mean, if he's going to be
2 years, you think so?
If he's going to keep this identity as an independent, he's going to have to find something to make Republicans mad.
Yeah, and Democrats may be sharpening their knives starting tomorrow to determine who might take them on in 2 years.
Any chance Scott Brown will just do a Sarah Palin and say, I don't really like this work part of the job. I like this election part of the job, and just go run for president. I mean, I like that part of it. The thing tonight, the big party tonight, I like that part. Sometimes I think they might just go, what do you think? Just go for it.
I think
who wants to go vote in the Senate? Just go right to the White House.
In a few months, he's going to look at his numbers, and if it looks like it's impossible to be reelected in Massachusetts, I think, being a national media star is the alternative.
It may be easier to be elected president and get reelected up here. What do you think of that?
It's possible.
It might be an easier bet. The smart movie, they say in The Godfather. Clemenza would have done it. Anyway, we'll be right back. Ben Smith and David Karlogas, but not with them. Much more from Boston, the center of the political world tonight, where Republican Scott Brown is the new senator in the seat held by the Kennedys for all those years back to 52 when they beat a Republican, Henry Cabot Lodge. You're watching Hardball. History's being made here on MSNBC, the place for politics. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We're back at Doyle's Cafe in Boston. We have to thank Chris Spellman and Jerry Burke and the whole family that run this great place. I've been coming here for years with my friend Ed Jesser, and with Tommy Menino, the mayor, who hangs out here too. It's a great spot in Jamaica Plain in Boston. It's a great part of town. In fact, it's a great town. I love it in Boston. Well, it's been a night of an upsetting defeat. It's been a stunning defeat. It's been a sad night for liberals and for Democrats, many of them. And maybe some people think this is just something that was going to happen. Scott Brown, he's the new senator from Massachusetts. For last thoughts tonight, let me bring back Steve Kornacki, and who's with the New York Observer. And of course, I also want to bring in political activist and smart writer Lawrence O'Donnell. Let me start with Steve first. Quickly, take a minute, half a minute or so, and what do you think about tonight? How's it going to settle into your system and the country's over the next couple of weeks?
Well, we're going to hear all sorts of, I think, over-dramatic, overblown statements. A Republican Party we're going to hear is back. The Obama agenda has been repudiated, we're going to hear. And I think that's going to play out for the next year to the extent that 2010 will be a very bad year for Democrats. But I think you look at the Ronald Reagan example between 1982 and 1984, you look at the Bill Clinton example between 1994 and 1996, and you realize that with Barack Obama, his presidency is not going to be determined by how bloody 2010 gets. It's going to be determined by whether the economy comes back in 2011. This will be a tough year. This will be a brutal year for his party, I believe, but this will not be the end for Barack Obama.
Lawrence O'Donnell, is this going to be this? That's a pattern, by the way, that Steve mentioned, as you and I know, goes way back. The idea of a president always has a rough crossing in his second year.
Well, look, this is the opportunity for the Democrats to figure out what there is to learn from this election. I got to tell you, in 1994, I wish we had one of these. We discovered it in November of 1994 that the Democrats were knocked out of power in the Senate and in the House. If we had seen an election like this in January of 1994, we might have been able to adjust back then when I was working in the Senate. We were all absolutely shocked on Election Day in 1994 when we lost the Senate and the House. So this could be the wake-up call that tactically shifts the way the Democrats are handling themselves in Congress and in the White House. I'm not sure what that shift has to be. It takes a smarter strategist than I am to figure out where to go from here, but they've got to learn something from this.
Great. Well said. Can't say anything better than that. Steve Kornacki, Lawrence O'Donnell. Join us again tomorrow night. Tomorrow night at 5, not tomorrow night, it's tonight, 5 and 7 Eastern for more Hardball. Countdown with Keith Olbermann starts right now.
And good evening again from New York. The outcome from Massachusetts tonight supposed to have been a foregone conclusion. How do you hold a special election to fill Senator Edward M. Kennedy's Senate seat, the one he held for 47 years, and not expect the Democrat to be the easy victor? Instead tonight, the Boston Globe reporting that even before the race had been called, the Democrat Martha Coakley, who just finished her remarks there, conceding in a phone call to Republican Scott Brown, as I like to say in sports about that speech you just saw, and the campaign, get a roll of stamps and mail it in. Minutes later, the Associated Press made their official call, projecting Scott Brown the winner of the special election to replace Ted Kennedy in the United States Senate. The numbers to this point, as of this hour, are really besides the point. At 52-47, with 93% of the vote in, Brown to become the 41st Republican in the 100-member Senate, 41.5 counting Mr. Lieberman, which could allow the GOP to block the president's health care reform legislation, what had been the defining issue of Senator Kennedy's career in a special electoral system set up by Democrats in power in Massachusetts. It is Schadenfreude in its original definition. The Democratic blame game began well ahead of tonight's poll closings, let alone the vote count. A Democratic official telling MSNBC this evening, before polls closed, that Mr. Brown had been able to close the gap and then lap Coakley because, quote, the Democratic candidate was literally on a vacation. In turn, the Coakley campaign blamed national Democratic officials for the expected loss. Let's go first to Nora O'Donnell, who's standing by at the campaign headquarters of Scott Brown, the senator-elect from Massachusetts. And I don't think anybody would have believed us if we had said we were going to be